Have you ever felt like you are a living contradiction? A walking paradox? A collection of warring desires, all housed under one roof? You crave the deep comfort of stability, the predictable rhythm of a life well planned. Yet a wild part of your soul yearns for the open road, for the thrill of the unknown, for a life that is an unwritten story. You long for profound connection, to merge with another, to be truly seen and understood. Yet you also fiercely guard your solitude, needing that sacred space to hear your own thoughts. To be unapologetically yourself, you chase the markers of success that the world applauds. The career, the accomplishments, the tangible proof of your worth. But in the quiet moments, in the dead of night, another voice whispers, asking about peace, about meaning, about a different kind of wealth that cannot be counted. This feeling of being pulled in 1,000 different directions is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are alive and fully human. Society, however, does not often make room for this complexity. It asks you to choose, to be one thing, to present a neat and tidy version of yourself to the world. Be ambitious, but not aggressive. Be sensitive, but not emotional. Be independent, but not alone. The pressure to resolve these inner tensions, to pick a side in the war within, is the hidden source of so much of our modern anxiety. That quiet hum of dissatisfaction that follows us, even in our moments of triumph. It is the feeling that no matter what we achieve, something vital is always being left behind. But what if there was another way? A path that does not demand you to cut away parts of yourself to fit into a smaller, more manageable shape? What if the goal was not to solve the paradox, but to live inside of it? What if your contradictions were not your flaws, but your greatest strength, the very source of your wholeness? There was a guide, a pioneer of the soul, who spent his entire life navigating this very territory. His name was Carl Jung, and he created a map for those brave enough to explore their own inner wilderness. His teachings are not about simple answers or positive thinking mantras. They are a profound invitation to descend into the depths of who you are, to confront your shadows, to embrace your contradictions, and to discover the unifying self that lies at the center of the storm. Through the immersive world of audiobooks, we can walk alongside him on this journey. We can learn to understand the messages the universe sends us, not through grand signs, but through the subtle, persistent whispers of our own paradoxical nature. This is not just a study of psychology. It is the beginning of a conversation with your own soul. To understand the art of living with paradox, we must first understand the man who made this art his life's work, the master cartographer of the soul, Carl Gustav Jung. He was not a philosopher who lived in an ivory tower, spinning theories from abstract thought. He was a physician, a psychiatrist, who rolled up his sleeves and plunged his hands into the messy, chaotic, beautiful and terrifying reality of the human psyche. He was born in Switzerland in 1875, the son of a pastor, and from his earliest days, he was attuned to the unseen world, to the currents of meaning that ran beneath the surface of ordinary life. He was a child who spoke to stones, who had visions, who felt the presence of two distinct personalities within himself. One, a modern Swiss schoolboy. The other, a wise old man from a distant century. This early experience of an inner duality, of a life lived on two levels at once, became the seed of his entire life's work. In the early 20th century, the world of psychology was dominated by one colossal figure, Sigmund Freud. Freud was the trailblazer, the one who first dared to suggest that we are not masters in our own house, that our conscious minds are driven by vast, unconscious forces. Jung, a brilliant young psychiatrist, was naturally drawn to Freud's revolutionary ideas, and for a time, he was Freud's chosen heir. the crown prince destined to carry the psychoanalytic movement into the future. But there was a fundamental difference in their vision, a divergence in their souls that would eventually lead to a painful and historic break. For Freud, the unconscious was primarily a cellar, a dark basement where we repress our primal, instinctual, and primarily sexual drives. It was a repository of the past, something to be excavated and managed to cure neurotic symptoms. Jung, however, began to see something more. He saw that the unconscious was not just a cellar, but also a source. Not just a repository of the past, but a wellspring of future potential. It was not just personal. It was also collective. He believed the psyche was not a machine with a broken part, but a living, breathing, self-regulating ecosystem, constantly striving for balance. For wholeness, this is a crucial concept to grasp. Jung called it the principle of compensation. If your conscious life becomes too one-sided, too rational, too materialistic, or too spiritual for that matter, the unconscious will begin to send messages. It will produce dreams, fantasies, and even symptoms, not to torment you, but to try and restore balance, to bring your attention to what is being neglected. It's like a ship that lists too far to one side. The psyche itself works to right the vessel, to bring it back into equilibrium. This single idea changes everything. It transforms suffering from a meaningless affliction into a purposeful message from the soul. The break with Freud, when it came, was devastating for Jung. It cast him out into the intellectual wilderness, alone, without a map, without the approval of his father figure. It was during this period of profound crisis, what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, that Jung did something extraordinary. Instead of running from the terrifying images and emotions welling up from within, he turned to face them. He suspended his rational, scientific mind and deliberately entered the world of his own fantasies, a process he would later refine and call active imagination. He recorded his journeys in his now famous Red Book, a stunning, calligraphy-filled manuscript that chronicles his descent into his own soul. He met figures there. Figures like Philemon, a wise old man with the wings of a kingfisher, and Salome, a blind and seductive young woman. He understood these were not mere hallucinations. They were personifications of the ancient forces within his own psyche. He was doing in his own life what he would later ask of his patients. He was living his own myth, courageously facing the dragons of his inner world to discover the treasure they were guarding. This journey was his trial by fire, and from it, he forged the core concepts that form the bedrock of his psychology. He gave us a new map of the mind, at the center of our known world. He placed the ego, the commander of our conscious ship, the part of us that says I and navigates the challenges of daily life. But he showed us that this conscious island is just a tiny speck in a vast ocean. Just beneath the surface lies the personal unconscious, the realm of our own forgotten memories, our repressed desires, and crucially, our shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves that hold a surprising power. Deeper still, he discovered a layer that connects all of humanity, the collective unconscious. This is not just a personal basement. It is the inherited psychic bedrock of the human species, an ancient river of experience flowing through every one of us. And within this collective ocean swim the great, universal patterns of human life. The archetypes, the persona, the social mask we wear, the anima and animus, our inner masculine and feminine counterparts, the wise old man, the great mother, the hero. These are not abstract ideas. They are living forces that shape our emotions, our relationships, and our destiny. And the ultimate goal of this inner journey, this lifelong process of engaging with these forces, is what Jung called individuation. It is the quest to become who you were always meant to be. Not a perfect being, but a whole one. A unique and fully realized individual who has integrated the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious. Why does any of this matter now? In our fast-paced, hyper-connected, and often spiritually starved world, it matters more than ever. We live in an age that glorifies the ego. That tells us we can control everything. That with enough data and the right algorithm, we can optimize our lives into a state of perpetual happiness. We are drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Jung's work is a powerful antidote to this modern malady. It reminds us that we are more than our social media profiles, more than our job titles, more than the sum of our achievements. It tells us that true meaning is found not by looking outward, but by turning inward. It gives us the tools to understand the messages of our dreams, the meaning hidden in our moods, the wisdom contained in our suffering. It validates that yearning for something more, that feeling that there is a deeper reality, a message from the universe waiting to be deciphered. Jung's teachings provide a framework, a psychological container for these spiritual longings, grounding them in the rich soil of human experience. He did not ask for blind faith. He asked for courageous exploration. He invites us to be scientists of our own souls. So, as we embark on this journey through his world, we begin where all conscious life begins, with that familiar, essential, and often misunderstood center of our universe. The part of us that wakes up in the morning and declares I am. We begin by taking a closer look at the captain of our ship, the ego. We begin our journey at the center of our known world, with the entity that says I. This is the ego. In our modern language, the word ego has become a term of criticism. We talk about someone having a big ego as a way of calling them arrogant or self-important. But in the Jungian sense, the ego is something far more fundamental and entirely necessary. It is not inherently good or bad. It simply is. Think of your entire consciousness as a vast, dark room, filled with all the potential thoughts, feelings, and memories of your life. The ego is the beam of a single flashlight, the focused point of light that illuminates a small section of that room at any given moment. It is the organizing principle of our conscious mind, the command center of our waking life. The ego is the part of you that provides a sense of identity and continuity. It's the thread that assures you that the person who went to sleep last night is the same person who woke up this morning. Even though your cells have changed, your mood is different, and the world has turned. It is the CEO of your personality, the one who makes plans, sets goals, analyzes data, and makes the countless decisions required to navigate the complexities of the external world. From choosing what to wear to negotiating a business deal. Without a healthy, functioning ego, we would be lost, adrift in a sea of chaotic impressions, sensations, and impulses, unable to create a coherent life story or act with purpose. A strong ego is our anchor in reality. It allows us to have a point of view, and to say, this is who I am, and this is what I stand for. It is not an enemy to be vanquished. It is the essential vessel for our journey. Here, however, we encounter our first great paradox, the ego. This indispensable captain of our conscious ship is also the source of our most profound limitation. Its greatest strength, its ability to focus and create order, is inextricably linked to its greatest weakness, its tendency to exclude. The flashlight beam, by its very nature, can only illuminate one small circle at a time, leaving the rest of an enormous room in darkness. The danger arises when the ego forgets this, when the captain of the ship begins to believe that the ship itself is the entire ocean. This is the primary illusion that traps so many of us. The ego mistakes its small, brightly lit circle of awareness for the totality of who we are. It identifies with the job title, the social role, the political belief, the personal history, and declares, "This is me." It creates a tidy, manageable story about ourselves and our world. And it fiercely defends that story against anything that might challenge it, anything from the vast, dark room of the unconscious that threatens to bubble up. A strange dream, an uncomfortable emotion, a creative impulse that doesn't fit the narrative, is seen as a threat. The ego becomes a tyrannical gatekeeper, a rigid border guard whose primary mission is to maintain the status quo, to keep life predictable and under control. This creates a brittle and defensive personality. Life becomes a matter of protecting one's territory rather than exploring new frontiers. The world is flattened, reduced to things the ego can understand and categorize. And the rich, mysterious, and often chaotic depth of the soul is locked away, feared as an enemy. This leads to two primary forms of psychic distress, two dangerous states of being: ego inflation and ego fragility. Ego inflation occurs when the ego becomes puffed up, like a balloon, identifying with something much larger than itself, usually an archetype from the collective unconscious. The captain of the ship suddenly believes he is the god of the sea. This is the person who becomes utterly convinced of their own righteousness, their special insight, their infallible genius, or even their supreme victimhood. They lose all perspective and humility, becoming rigid, dogmatic, and incapable of genuine relationship because they cannot see beyond the myth they are living. The ancient Greek myth of Narcissus is the perfect cautionary tale for this condition. But it's deeper than simple vanity. Narcissus falls in love not with himself, but with a reflection, a two-dimensional image on the surface of the water. He becomes fixated on the limited, surface-level picture of himself, completely unaware of the vast, mysterious depths of the pond beneath his reflection. The unconscious, and deaf to the calls of the nymph echo, the world of real relationship that is trying to connect with him. He is trapped by his identification with the ego image and ultimately starves to death, unable to receive any real nourishment from the world or from his own soul. His story is a warning. When the ego inflates and cuts itself off from the larger psychic world, it leads not to greatness, but to a sterile and lifeless end. The opposite pole is ego fragility. If the inflated ego is a rigid tyrant, the fragile ego is a terrified and overwhelmed servant. This is a state where the center of consciousness is weak, porous, and unable to hold its own against the pressures of the inner or outer world. The person with a fragile ego feels constantly buffeted by the opinions of others, their sense of self rising and falling with every bit of praise or criticism. They are easily flooded by their own emotions. One wave of anxiety or sadness can feel like a tsunami that threatens to capsize their entire being. They struggle to make decisions, to maintain boundaries, and to hold a steady course through life. While the inflated ego says, "I am everything," the fragile ego whispers, "I am nothing." Both are states of profound imbalance. A healthy ego is neither a tyrant nor a servant. It is a constitutional monarch. It has authority. It provides structure and leadership. But it understands that it is not the ultimate power. It is in service to a larger kingdom. The totality of the psyche, which Jung called the self. The proper role of the ego is to be a conscious mediator, a bridge, standing at the threshold between the demands of the outer world and the messages of the inner world. It must learn to listen. It must be strong enough to hear the whispers and sometimes the roars from the unconscious without being shattered. And it must have the wisdom to integrate these messages into conscious life. It needs to be flexible, capable of updating its own story, of admitting when it is wrong, of surrendering its need for absolute control in order to allow for growth and transformation. So, the ego is this profound paradox. We need it to function, to have an identity, to build a life. Yet, if we identify with it completely, we cut ourselves off from the very source of life. meaning, and renewal. It is the boat that allows us to sail, but it is not the ocean or the wind that fills its sails. To be truly whole, we must cultivate an ego that is both strong and humble, defined yet permeable, a loyal servant to the mystery, not a fearful master of a tiny, well-lead domain. This is a lifelong practice, a delicate, dense. It requires us to constantly ask, who is the I that is experiencing this? Is it the limited, historical ego with its fears and ambitions, or is there a deeper consciousness witnessing it all? Recognizing this distinction is the first step toward freedom. It allows us to hold our own story a little more lightly, to see our thoughts and emotions as events passing through consciousness rather than the sum total of who we are. We have now explored the captain's bridge, the command center of our conscious awareness. But every captain knows that the most vital and often most dangerous part of any voyage happens below deck, in the vast, dark cargo hold of the ship. What have we stored down there? In the forgotten corners of our own minds. This is the realm of the personal unconscious, the home of our own personal ghost, the shadow, if the ego is the small, well-lit room of our conscious life. Then we must now take a breath and turn the knob on the basement door. We must descend the stairs into that vast, dimly lit space that Jung called the personal unconscious. This is the realm of everything that belongs uniquely to you, but which currently lies outside the beam of your conscious awareness. It's the storage room of your individual life. Some of its contents are mundane, like forgotten memories of childhood afternoons or the name of a person you met once at a party. But its most significant and most active contents are the things that have been deliberately placed there. The things that have been repressed, denied, or disowned by the ego because they were too painful, too shameful, or simply too inconvenient for the story it was trying to tell about you. It is the repository of your unwept tears, your unspoken rage, your secret longings, and your undeveloped potentials. This personal basement is not a static archive. It is a dynamic, living part of you, and it has a primary inhabitant, a constant companion that follows you through life like your own shadow. And that, in fact, is what Jung called it. The shadow. The shadow is one of Jung's most vital and practical concepts. It is, quite simply, the other person in you. The personality you do not claim to be. It is the sum total of all the parts of yourself that your ego has rejected. From our earliest days, we are taught to be good. Our parents, our teachers, and our culture reward certain behaviors and punish others. We learn that being polite is good. Being angry is bad. We learn that being generous is good. Being selfish is bad. We learn that being strong is good. Being vulnerable is bad. In order to be loved and accepted, we begin a lifelong process of psychic editing. We identify with the acceptable traits, and we banish the unacceptable ones into the darkness of our unconscious. This collection of disowned parts coalesces to form the shadow. And here is the crucial point. The shadow is not necessarily evil. It is simply what we have deemed to be inferior, uncivilised, or inadmissible. Therefore, it contains not just our greed, our envy, our cowardice, and our cruelty, but often it holds our most precious, undeveloped strengths. The sensitive boy who is taught that boys don't cry banishes his tender, compassionate heart to the shadow. The intelligent, assertive girl who is told not to be bossy pushes her powerful leadership qualities into the dark. The shadow becomes a treasure chest of lost potential, a reservoir of vital life energy that we no longer have conscious access to, because we are, by definition, unconscious of our own shadow. We cannot see it in ourselves. So, what happens to it? It gets projected. The world becomes a vast screen, and we unconsciously cast our own inner darkness onto the people and groups around us. This is the psychological mechanism behind so much human conflict. It explains why we can have such sudden, intense, and often irrational emotional reactions to other people. That person at work who infuriates you with their laziness, might they be carrying the part of you that secretly longs to rest? The part you've repressed in your own relentless drive for productivity, that public figure whose arrogance you despise. Might they be a screen for your own disowned ambition and desire for recognition? The things in others that irritate, infuriate, or even fascinate us the most are often flashing signs pointing directly at our own unacknowledged shadow. We form a world of heroes and villains, of good guys and bad guys, which is really just a projection of the inner drama we refuse to acknowledge. We become rigidly righteous, obsessed with the splinter in our brother's eye, because we are terrified of seeing the plank in our own. This constant projection is exhausting. It drains our psychic energy and keeps us in a state of perpetual conflict with the world. A world that is merely mirroring back to us the war we are refusing to fight within ourselves. This leads us to the great, transformative paradox of the shadow, the alchemical secret at the heart of Jung's psychology. The gold is hidden in the dark. Our vitality, our authenticity, and our wholeness do not come from striving to be a good person. They come from daring to be a real person. And being real means being whole. And being whole means embracing all of who we are, especially the parts we have tried to throw away. The goal of shadow work is not to eliminate the shadow. That is impossible. Nor is it to indulge its every dark impulse. The goal is to make it conscious. It is the courageous act of turning around, facing that dark figure that has been following you, and asking, what do you have to teach me? What part of myself have I abandoned in you? This is the work of a lifetime, and it is the path to true strength. When you reclaim your projected anger, you are no longer a victim of it in others. Instead, you gain the energy to set firm boundaries in your life. When you reclaim your repressed fear, you develop compassion for the fearful part of all beings. When you reclaim your disowned selfishness, you might finally learn how to take care of your own needs. Each piece of the shadow that you reintegrate is a piece of lost soul that you are bringing home. It is a reclaiming of your own power. So how does one begin this sacred work? You don't have to go looking for the shadow. It is already finding you. Pay attention to your emotional triggers. Notice your knee-jerk judgments of others. Look at your dreams, where the shadow often appears as a menacing figure of your same gender. Engage with this figure. Ask it questions. What does it want? What is it trying to tell you? The classic story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is the ultimate parable of what happens when the shadow is not integrated, but violently repressed. Dr. Jekyll, the respectable, conscious ego, and sees his darker side as a pure evil to be separated and destroyed. But his experiment doesn't destroy his inner Hyde. It gives him autonomous life, who, fed by the energy of total repression, grows stronger and more monstrous in the dark, until he finally erupts and consumes the very man who created him. The tragic lesson is that what we repress does not go away. It goes into the basement and lifts weights. It gathers power in the dark until it is strong enough to smash through the floorboards. The only way to deal with the inner Mr. Hyde is to bring him upstairs into the conscious light, to acknowledge him, to listen to him, and to integrate his raw, primal energy into a larger, more complete personality. This journey into the personal unconscious is the beginning of true self-knowledge. It is a humbling and often uncomfortable process, for it requires us to withdraw our easy judgments of the world and take responsibility for the darkness within. It asks us to sacrifice our cherished innocence and our illusion of being a good person in exchange for the far more valuable prize of being a whole one. We have now opened the door to our own personal basement and met the shadow that dwells there. The figure cobbled together from the lost and rejected pieces of our own life story. But as we stand in that basement, we might begin to notice other doors. Older, heavier doors. that lead down into even deeper levels of the psyche. What about the archetypal darkness we see in myths and fairy tales across the world? What about the universal monsters that haunt the nightmares of all humanity? Our personal shadow, it seems, is just one manifestation of a darkness that is far older and more vast than our individual lives. To understand that, we must leave the personal cellar and venture into the very bedrock of the soul, into the boundless, shared realm of the collective unconscious. If the personal unconscious is the basement beneath the house of your individual life, then we must now venture deeper still, into the very foundations upon which the entire neighborhood is built. We are entering the vast, unsent, and shared territory that Jung called the collective unconscious. This was perhaps his most radical, most controversial, and most profound discovery. It is a concept that expands the human soul beyond the confines of a single lifetime, connecting us to a psychic inheritance as old as humanity itself. The collective unconscious is not personal. You did not create it, and it is not made up of your repressed memories or experiences. Rather, it is an inherited layer of the psyche, a kind of psychic DNA that is common to all people, in all places, at all times. It is the repository of all the latent memory traces and experiences of our human and even pre-human ancestors. It is the shared psychological bedrock of our species. Jung did not arrive at this revolutionary idea through mystical speculation. He was led there by cold, hard evidence from his clinical practice. He began to observe a startling phenomenon. His patients, modern, rational Swiss citizens, would describe dreams and fantasies filled with strange, powerful, mythological symbols. Symbols from ancient cultures, like Gnosticism or alchemy, that they had absolutely no conscious knowledge of. A patient might dream of a sun with a phallus, a symbol found in the ancient Mithraic religion, without ever having heard of Mithras. They would describe figures and narratives that mirrored obscure myths from civilizations long dead. How was this possible? For Jung, the only logical explanation was that these symbols were not learned. They were inherited. They were rising up from a deeper, universal layer of the mind, a collective memory bank that predates and informs all individual experience. It's like being born with not just a physical body, but a psychic body, one that carries the blueprints of what it means to be human. The structures of this psychic DNA, the organizing principles of the collective unconscious, are what Jung named the archetypes. An archetype is not a specific image or a fully formed idea. It is more like an empty form, a universal pattern or predisposition that is then filled in by the experiences of our individual lives and culture. Think of it this way. The archetype of the Great Mother is like a universal, pre-existing riverbed in the human soul. The specific experiences you have with your own mother, the images of motherhood from your culture, the stories you hear. This is the water that flows through and fills that archetypal riverbed. The riverbed itself, the potential for the experience of mother, is universal and innate. The water is personal and cultural. This is why the figure of the Great Mother appears in countless mythologies across the globe, sometimes as a loving, nurturing goddess like Demeter, and sometimes as a terrifying, devouring one like Kali. The form is universal. The expression is particular. The human psyche is prefigured to experience life through these archetypal lenses. Patterns like the hero, the trickster, the wise old man, the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self. They are the instincts of the human soul. The proof of this is written across the entire history of human culture. It is in our myths, our religions, our fairy tales, and even our modern cinema. When we look at the great stories from civilizations that had no contact with one another, we find the same fundamental plots, the same characters, the same symbols, recurring again and again. Why do so many disconnected cultures have a great flood myth? Why does the story of a hero who must slay a dragon to rescue a maiden appear everywhere, from ancient Babylon to medieval Europe? Why does the figure of a dying and resurrecting god, a symbol of transformation and rebirth, underpin so many religious traditions? For Jung, the answer was clear. These stories are not invented. They are discovered. They are the natural expressions of the archetypes, bubbling up from the collective unconscious. They are the dreams of the species. Perhaps the most famous and clear example of this is the recurring myth of the hero's journey. This single, universal story structure can be found at the heart of our most enduring narratives. It begins with a hero living in an ordinary world who receives a call to adventure. At first, they may refuse the call. But a mentor figure, a wise old man or woman, often appears to guide them. They cross the threshold into a special world, a supernatural realm of danger and wonder. Here, they face a series of trials, confront their deepest fears, and must metaphorically or literally slay a dragon. From this confrontation, they gain an ultimate boon, a treasure, a secret, or a new level of consciousness. The final stage is the return journey, bringing this boon back to enrich the ordinary world. Think of Odysseus, King Arthur, Buddha, Moses, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Neo in The Matrix. The names and settings change, but the underlying archetypal pattern, the psychic journey of the ego leaving its comfort zone to confront the unconscious and return with a treasure for the community, remain constant. This story resonates so deeply with us because it is our story. It is the blueprint for psychological and spiritual growth that is imprinted upon every human soul. Herein lies the final paradox of the collective unconscious. To connect with this realm is to connect with the source of all creativity, spirituality, and profound meaning. It is where we feel a sense of belonging to the great chain of humanity, where we are nourished by the wisdom of the ages, great art, transformative religious experiences, and moments of stunning creative insight are all gifts from this deep well. However, this is a realm of primordial, non-human power, and it can be incredibly dangerous. It is the deep ocean, and if the ego, the captain of the ship, is not strong and well anchored, an eruption from this realm can be overwhelming. A tidal wave from the collective can swamp the conscious mind, leading to psychosis, a state where the individual is completely inundated by archetypal content they cannot integrate. This is also true on a mass scale. A whole nation can become possessed by an archetype when a charismatic leader taps into the collective shadow or a distorted hero myth. For instance, the results can be catastrophic, unleashing forces of destruction that sweep away all individual reason and morality. The 20th century provided many terrifying examples of this. We have now journeyed from the lit room of the ego, through the personal basement of the shadow, and into the very geological bedrock of the human spirit, the collective unconscious. We have seen that this deep realm is structured by universal patterns, the archetypes, which influence our lives in ways we rarely comprehend. Having grasped this immense and foundational concept, our exploration must logically turn to how these powerful, invisible forces take concrete shape in our everyday existence. We must begin to identify them in our own lives. And we will start with the very first archetype we present to the world, the one that stands at the boundary between our inner self and the outer society. It is our social face, au diplomatique passeport, our necessary compromise with the world. We now turn our attention to the mask we all wear, the persona, as we journey back from the ancient, oceanic depths of the collective unconscious. We return to the surface of our everyday lives, having established that our psyche is structured by these universal, archetypal patterns. Our task now is to see how they take shape in the world we navigate daily. We begin with the archetype that forms the very frontier between our inner self and the outer world. The face we present to society. Jung gave it a name taken from the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek drama. He called it the persona. The persona is your social mask, your psychological clothing. It is the role, or set of roles, that you play in the grand theater of life. You have a persona for your professional life, the competent and diligent employee or the authoritative boss. You have another for your family, the dutiful son or the nurturing mother. You have one for your friends, and perhaps another for strangers. It is the curated version of yourself, a composite of your job title, your social status, your manner of speaking, your style of dress, and the general impression you seek to make on others. It is a necessary compromise between your true, complex individuality and the expectations of the society you live in. It is crucial to understand that the persona is not inherently false or bad. In fact, a healthy, well-developed, and flexible persona is an absolute necessity for navigating the world successfully. It is a vital tool for social adaptation. Without a persona, we would be like a raw, exposed nerve, indiscriminately blurting out every fleeting thought, feeling, and impulse. We would be unable to function in different social contexts, causing constant friction and misunderstanding. A healthy persona is like a good wardrobe. It gives you the appropriate attire for any situation. You wouldn't wear a swimsuit to a funeral or a tuxedo to the beach. In the same way, the psychological self you present during a high-stakes business negotiation is different from the one you present while comforting a crying child. This is not hypocrisy. It is social intelligence. The persona is a protective layer. It shields our more vulnerable, private self from unnecessary scrutiny and allows us to interact with the world with a degree of smoothness and efficiency. It is the interface that allows our inner world to connect with the outer world without causing a short circuit. It allows for politeness, for civility, and for the complex group dynamics that define human society. The danger, as with all things in the psychic world, lies in a loss of balance. The problem is not in having a mask. The problem arises when the mask fuses to the face, when the ego forgets it is playing a role and comes to believe it is the role. This is perhaps one of the most common maladies of modern life. The over-identification with the persona. The professor who cannot stop lecturing his family at the dinner table. The doctor who treats her friends like patients. The politician who is always campaigning even with his own children. These are people whose true selves have been suffocated by their social role. The mask is no longer a tool they can put on and take off. It has become their skin. When this happens, life becomes a hollow performance. Authenticity drains away, replaced by a brittle, defensive need to maintain the public image at all costs. The individual loses touch with their own genuine feelings and desires, which are often inconvenient for the role they are playing. A profound sense of emptiness, phoniness, and alienation can set in. That nagging feeling of being a fraud in one's own life. The person becomes a two-dimensional character, a well-played part. But the true audience, the inner self, is left sitting in the dark, bored, and starving for a taste of real life. Let us consider the story of a man we will call Frank, the CEO of a successful corporation. For 30 years, Frank's persona was his identity. He was Frank, the CEO. He wore the uniform of sharp suits. He spoke in a decisive, authoritative tone. He was flawlessly professional, and he worked 80 hours a week. His entire sense of self-worth was derived from his performance in this role. His family learned to interact with the CEO, a figure who was often distant, preoccupied, and demanding of efficiency. His friendships were business adjacent, built on networking and shared status. Frank was highly respected, wealthy, and powerful. a pillar of the community. Then, at the age of 65, he retired. The mask that had been his face for 3 decades was suddenly stripped away. The title was gone. In the corner office was empty. The phone stopped ringing with urgent demands, and Frank was confronted with a terrifying, echoing void. He would wake up in the morning and feel a profound sense of aimlessness. Who was he without the meetings, the targets, the respect of his employees? He had spent so long playing the part of the CEO that he had forgotten and had never truly developed. The man named Frank, the parts of him that were creative, vulnerable, playful, or simply quiet, had been relegated to the shadow for decades. His retirement, which should have been a reward, became a psychological crisis, a period of deep depression and a desperate search for an identity he had long ago abandoned. Frank's story is a powerful illustration of the danger of allowing the persona to swallow the soul. And so we arrive at the central paradox of the persona. It is a tool that is essential for connecting with the world. Yet it can become the very barrier that prevents the world from truly connecting with us. And worse, that prevents us from connecting with ourselves. The great challenge of a conscious life is to wear our masks without becoming them. It is to cultivate the awareness of an actor who knows they are on stage. The actor can pour immense skill, energy, and conviction into their role. They can move the audience to tears or laughter, but they never forget that backstage, in the dressing room, their true self is waiting. They know the difference between the role and the one who plays the role. For us, this means developing a conscious relationship with our personas. It means being able to step back and observe our social roles with a degree of detachment and even a sense of humor. It requires asking ourselves, am I doing this because it is genuinely how I feel? Or because it is what my role as a good father, a top employee, or a loyal friend demands? It is the art of being in the world, but not entirely of the world. We have now thoroughly examined our outer face, the mask we present to society in order to function and relate. We have seen its necessity, danger, and its inherent paradox. It is the face we show to others. But what about the face we show to ourselves? If the persona is the archetype that governs our relationship with the external world, what archetypes govern the landscape of our inner world? As we take off the outer mask in the quiet of our own soul, we find ourselves face to face with other, more mysterious figures who carry the essence of our inner life, our moods, our creativity, and the nature of our deepest relationships. We must now turn our gaze from the outer character to the inner soul image, the hidden counterpart to our conscious personality. For a man, this figure is the anima, the inner feminine. For a woman, it is the animus, the inner masculine. Our next step is to meet these powerful, elusive figures who shape so much of our inner reality. If the persona is our outer face, the mask we present to the world, we must now turn our gaze inward to meet the figure who represents our inner face, our very soul. Jung discovered that our psyche is a balancing act, a world of complementary opposites, corresponding to the outer masculine identity of a man. There is an inner feminine figure, which he called the anima, the Latin word for soul, and corresponding to the outer feminine identity of a woman, there is an inner masculine figure, the animus, the Latin word for mind or spirit. These are not references to one's sexual orientation, but rather to the inherent, archetypal contrasexual energy that exists within every person. The anima in a man carries the potential for qualities we have culturally associated with the feminine, such as deep relatedness, intuition, emotional sensitivity, a connection to nature, and the capacity for nurturing. The animus in a woman carries the potential for qualities culturally associated with the masculine, such as focused logic, esotericism, objective reasoning, and the courage to act in the world in a perfectly whole being. These inner and outer energies would exist in a beautiful, conscious harmony for most of us. However, this inner figure remains largely unconscious, leading to some of the most profound complications in our lives. The initial form and character of this inner figure are shaped by our earliest experiences. A boy's anima is first colored by the powerful figure of his mother. Just as a girl's animus is first colored by her father, this primary parental image creates the first layer of the archetype, which is then further shaped and modified by all subsequent encounters with the opposite sex, as well as by the powerful collective images from our culture. For a man, his anima might be a composite of his mother, his first love, and cultural figures like Helen of Troy, the Virgin Mary, or a seductive movie star. For a woman, her animus might be a blend of her father, a respected teacher, and cultural heroes like a Stoic philosopher, a brave warrior, or a brilliant artist. This inner figure, this soul image, carries an immense psychic charge. It represents the mystery of the other and holds the key to a part of our own soul we have yet to access. Because it is unconscious, we cannot see it within ourselves. So we do what we always do with powerful unconscious content. We project it. This is the secret source of romantic infatuation, the thunderbolt of falling in love. A man is going about his life when he suddenly meets a woman who, for reasons he cannot explain, seems to be a goddess walking the earth. She is the carrier of his projected anima. He falls in love not with the real, complex human being standing before him, but with the image of his own soul that he now sees in her. He idealizes her, placing upon her the impossible burden of being his everything, his muse, his savior, his reason for living. This initial projection creates a powerful bond, but it is doomed to lead to disappointment. Eventually, the real woman, with her own flaws, needs, and desires, will inevitably fail to live up to the divine image he has projected onto her. He then feels betrayed, disillusioned, and may move on, searching for another woman to carry the projection, repeating the cycle endlessly. When this anima remains unconscious and negative, it can also possess a man from within, leading to sudden, irrational moods, venomous gossip, and a kind of sullen, passive-aggressive sentimentality. The man becomes a caricature of the negative feminine, completely at the mercy of his own unintegrated emotional life. For a woman, the dynamic is similar. She projects her animus, her inner image of the masculine spirit, onto a man, seeing him as a hero, a genius, or a savior who will give her life meaning and direction. When he inevitably reveals himself to be a mere mortal, she may become bitter and cynical. When a woman is possessed by her unconscious animus, it doesn't typically manifest as moodiness, but as a kind of rigid, unassailable opinionatedness. She may become argumentative and dogmatic, spouting powerful, often abstract, and second-hand opinions as if they were her own deeply felt truths. Her thinking becomes disconnected from her heart. She might find herself saying things like, "It is a known fact that," or "everyone agrees that," using the power of the collective, disembodied masculine spirit to overwhelm any personal, feeling-based argument. She loses her own feminine capacity for nuanced, personal relatedness, becoming a mouthpiece for an inner tyrant. The ancient myth of Hades and Persephone provides a profound allegory for the journey of integrating this soul figure. Persephone is the innocent maiden, the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the sunlit, conscious earth. She is abducted by Hades, the lord of the underworld, and taken into the depths. This abduction, while terrifying, is a necessary soul-making event. In the darkness of the unconscious underworld, Persephone is forced to mature. She tastes the pomegranate, the fruit of deep experience, and becomes the queen of the underworld in her own right. She is no longer just a naive child of the light. When she eventually returns to the surface world, she is transformed. She now carries the wisdom of both realms, the conscious and the unconscious. This myth perfectly illustrates the journey of the anima or animus. It must be taken from its naive state in the conscious world. It must descend into the depths of the psyche, and it must be consciously engaged with in order to become a bridge between the worlds, a source of true wisdom. Herein lies the paradox and the promise. When left unconscious and projected, the anima and animus trap us in cycles of destructive relationships and internal possession. They are the source of so much heartache and confusion. However, the conscious integration of this inner figure is one of the most important and rewarding tasks of the inner life. For a man, this means withdrawing his anima projection from the women in his life and beginning to develop his own feminine capacities. It means learning to value his own feelings, to cultivate his intuition, to connect with his creative spirit. When he does this, he no longer needs a woman to be his soul, because he is finally in a relationship with his own. For a woman, integration means withdrawing her animus projection from men and developing her own inner masculine spirit. It means cultivating her capacity for clear, focused thought, finding her own inner authority, and learning to act on her own behalf in the world with courage and conviction. She no longer needs a man to be her spirit, because she is connected to her own. This process transforms the anima from a moody saboteur into a muse, a guide to the inner world of creativity and meaning. It transforms the animus from a dogmatic tyrant into a source of clarity, courage, and spiritual purpose. We have now journeyed through the primary archetypes that structure our personality. We have examined the persona, our outer mask for society. We have confronted the shadow, our disowned otherness, and we have now met the anima and animus, the soul figures that shape our inner life and our relationships. The question naturally arises: to what end? Why must we engage with these powerful, often difficult, inner forces? This is not merely a series of intellectual exercises or disconnected psychological cleanups. The encounters with these archetypes are crucial steps on a much larger, purposeful journey. They are the trials and labors on a sacred quest that has a name and an ultimate goal. This overarching process, the central theme of Jung's entire psychology, is the lifelong journey toward becoming a complete, undivided, and authentic human being. It is the quest for wholeness. It is the process of individuation. Having journeyed through the essential structures of the psyche, the persona, the shadow, and the anima and animus, we now arrive at the very purpose of this exploration. The encounters with these powerful archetypes are not random events or isolated psychological curiosities. They are fundamental stages in a greater, overarching process, the central and unifying theme of Jung's entire body of work. This process is the ultimate goal of a conscious life, the sacred quest to become the person you were always meant to be. Jung called this journey individuation. The word itself is significant. It does not mean individualism in the modern sense of a selfish, ego-driven pursuit of being different for the sake of being different. It means becoming an individual, which is to say, undivided. It is the lifelong process of integrating the disparate, conflicting, and often unconscious parts of yourself into a functioning, harmonious whole. It is the journey from a fragmented state, ruled by unconscious complexes and warring opposites, to a state of conscious wholeness, centered in a deeper reality. Think of an acorn. Within that small, humble seed, the entire potential of a mighty oak tree already exists as a blueprint. The acorn does not need to be taught how to become an oak. Its purpose, its telos, is to grow into the fullest expression of its own unique oakness. Individuation is the human equivalent of this natural, purpose-driven process within each of us. Jung believed there is an innate blueprint of our own unique wholeness. a potential self that we are meant to become. Our life's work is to create the conditions, both inner and outer, that allow this potential to unfold. It is the process of shedding the layers of who we were told we should be. The persona, the cultural conditioning, the family expectations, so that we can finally become who we are. It is a journey of becoming not more, but more truly oneself. Here we must make one of the most crucial distinctions in all of psychology: the difference between perfection and wholeness. Many modern spiritual and self-help systems aim for a kind of perfection. They seek to eliminate negative thoughts, to transcend anger and sadness, to become a sanitized, flawless, and perpetually happy version of a human being. This, from a Jungian perspective, is a dangerous fantasy of the ego. It is a recipe for creating an even larger and more dangerous shadow, as all the messy, difficult, and dark parts of life get repressed in the name of a false light. Individuation, by contrast, does not aim for perfection. It aims for wholeness, and wholeness, by its very definition, must include the imperfections. It means being conscious of your light and your darkness. It means having the capacity for kindness and being aware of your potential for cruelty. It means accepting your strengths and your weaknesses, your joys and your sorrows. A whole person is not a saint. A whole person is a real person. They have consciously withdrawn their projections. They have faced their shadow. They have integrated their inner contrasexual side. And in doing so, they have become a container strong enough to hold the tension of the opposites that defines human existence. They have stopped trying to be only good and have instead embarked on the much more difficult and rewarding journey of being complete. This journey, while being a natural impulse of the psyche, does not happen automatically or without our participation. The acorn may hold the potential for the oak tree, but if it falls on barren rock, without water or sunlight, that potential will never be realized. Similarly, individuation requires our conscious effort, our courage, and our commitment. It is a collaborative work between the conscious ego and the totality of the psyche. The self, it requires the difficult labor we have been discussing, the painful honesty of looking at our shadow, the humbling work of withdrawing our projections from others, the confusing and delicate dance of integrating the anima or animus. It often requires us to suffer. We must suffer the tension of holding contradictory feelings. We must suffer the pain of letting go of cherished illusions about ourselves. We must suffer the loneliness that sometimes comes from choosing our own unique path over the well-trodden highway of the collective. It is an active, conscious choice to turn inward, to listen to the messages from the deep, and to honor them, even when they are inconvenient or frightening. It is the difference between being a passive log tossed about by the unconscious currents of life, and becoming a conscious sailor who learns to work with the winds and the tides to navigate toward a chosen destination. The ancient art of alchemy provides the most profound metaphor for this transformative process. On the surface, the alchemists sought to turn base metals, like lead, into pure gold. Jung, after studying their strange and symbolic texts for years, realized they were not describing a literal chemical process, but a sophisticated, symbolic system for psychological transformation, a blueprint for individuation. In the alchemical imagination, the sealed vessel, the vase, represents the human psyche, the protected container in which the work takes place, the prima materia, or first matter. The lead is our raw, unconscious, shadow-laden, human nature. The fire that heats the vessel is the suffering and emotional intensity of life, the necessary energy for transformation. The alchemists described a series of stages: the nigredo, a blackening or putrefaction, which corresponds to the descent into the shadow and the confrontation with our own darkness. This is followed by the albedo, a whitening or purification, corresponding to the integration of the anima, animus, and the clarification of the soul. Finally comes the rubedo, a reddening, the creation of the legendary philosopher's stone, or the gold itself. This final stage represents the synthesis of the opposites, the birth of the whole, integrated self. The gold is not material wealth. It is the incorruptible, authentic, and whole human being who has successfully navigated the perilous journey of their own soul. This great work leads us to a final, beautiful paradox. The process of individuation is a journey of differentiating ourselves from the collective, of becoming more and more uniquely and specifically ourselves. It is a path away from conformity and toward our own singular truth. Yet, the more we become ourselves, the more we realize our profound connection to all of humanity. As we drill down into the core of our own being, we break through the thin crust of the personal and discover the universal bedrock of the collective unconscious beneath. We find that our most personal struggles are also the most universal struggles. We realize that the archetypes that structure our soul are the same archetypes that have structured the souls of all people throughout history. The fully individuated person, the mighty oak in its unique perfection, is also the most complete expression of the universal archetype of the tree. In becoming most truly ourselves, we are no longer alienated from humanity, but find our proper place within it, as a unique and necessary part of the whole. Individuation is the ultimate reconciliation of the one and the many, the personal and the universal. It is the art of becoming a singular note that contributes perfectly to the great symphony of existence. But how do we hear the music? If individuation is a collaboration with the unconscious, what is the primary language it speaks? How do we receive our instructions for this great work? For that, we must turn to the nightly theater of the soul, the primary channel of communication between the conscious and unconscious mind, the world of dreams. If individuation is the great work of a lifetime, a collaboration between the conscious ego and the vast intelligence of the unconscious, then we must ask a vital, practical question. How do they communicate? How does the captain of the ship receive messages from the wise, ancient ocean upon which he sails? The primary channel for this sacred dialogue, the nightly mail delivery from the soul, is the world of dreams. In our modern, rationalistic culture, we have largely forgotten how to read this mail. We tend to dismiss dreams as the random firing of neurons, the meaningless mental debris of the day, or bizarre, nonsensical stories to be forgotten upon waking. But for Jung, and for wisdom traditions throughout history, dreams are anything but meaningless. They are the unvarnished, uncensored, and utterly honest language of the psyche. A dream is a natural product of the soul, as a plant is a natural product of the earth. It is not trying to trick you or hide something from you, as Freud's theory of dream censorship sometimes implied. On the contrary, a dream is an attempt to reveal something, to communicate a truth that the conscious mind has been overlooking. The fundamental principle of Jung's dream psychology is the idea of compensation. The psyche, like the body, is a self-regulating system that constantly seeks balance, or homeostasis. Dreams are one of the primary ways it achieves this. A dream will almost always compensate for a one-sided or deficient conscious attitude. Its purpose is to show you the other side of the story, to bring your attention to the perspective you are missing in your waking life. For example, if your conscious ego attitude is one of radical self-sufficiency and you believe you don't need anyone, you might have dreams in which you are lost, helpless, and in desperate need of aid. The dream is not mocking you. It is trying to restore balance by showing you your hidden vulnerability and your need for connection. If you are a person who lives a very serious, responsible, and controlled life, you might have dreams of a mischievous, playful trickster figure who gleefully breaks all the rules. This is the compensatory voice of your repressed joy and spontaneity. The dream is a mirror held up to your soul, but it is a special kind of mirror that reflects not what you are, but what you are lacking in your conscious awareness. Understanding this principle is the key that unlocks the entire purpose of dreaming. It transforms dreams from random nonsense into purposeful, personal messages designed for your healing and your wholeness. So, how do we begin to understand this forgotten language? Jung's approach is not about using a universal dream dictionary, where a snake always means X and flying always means Y. Such an approach is useless because a symbol is not a sign. A stop sign has one meaning. But a symbol, like a lion, contains a vast, paradoxical richness of meaning. It can represent royalty, ferocity, courage, but also predatory instinct and brute force. The meaning of a dream symbol is unique to the dreamer. To begin, one must treat the dream with respect. Like a sacred text or a visitor from a foreign land, write it down in as much detail as possible. Then, work with the symbols. Instead of asking, "What does this lion mean?" ask, "What is a lion?" Explore your personal associations, cultural associations, and the mythical dimension of the symbol. Most importantly, connect the dream to your current waking life. Ask yourself, what was happening in my life in the days before this dream? What conscious attitude is so one-sided that my psyche needed to produce this specific dream as a compensation? A dream is always a commentary on your present situation. Looking at a series of dreams over time is even more powerful. A single dream is a snapshot, but a series of dreams is a feature film, revealing the plot and character development of your inner life. Let's imagine a practical, anonymized example. A woman, a dedicated social worker we'll call Sarah, spends her days helping the most vulnerable people in her city. Her conscious identity is built around being compassionate, selfless, and giving. She is widely admired for her goodness, but she comes to therapy feeling exhausted, burnt out, and strangely empty. She then reports a powerful dream. In the dream, she is in a beautiful, walled garden, a place of peace. But in the center of the garden is a magnificent, ancient tree whose roots are dry and cracking. She knows in the dream that the tree is dying of thirst, and she feels a profound sadness. Now, a Jungian approach would not offer a simplistic interpretation. It would explore the symbols. A garden is often a symbol of the soul, a cultivated inner space. A tree is a classic symbol of life, growth, and the self. What does it mean that this tree, her own life tree, is dying of thirst in the very center of her soul garden? The dream is a brutal but necessary compensation for her conscious attitude. While she has been watering everyone else's garden in the outer world, her own inner life, her own soul, is being neglected to the point of death. The dream is not criticizing her for being a good person. It is sending an urgent message that her one-sided selflessness is creating a devastating inner drought. It is a desperate plea from her own soul, asking for water, for attention, for her to finally give to herself. This single dream, when properly understood, can become the turning point in a person's life. This leads us to the central paradox of dreams. We dismiss them precisely because of the qualities that make them so valuable. Their illogical nature, their bizarre juxtapositions, and their defiance of the laws of physics are not flaws. They are features. The conscious ego thinks in linear, logical prose. The unconscious, the soul, thinks in the poetic, multi-dimensional language of images and metaphor. Dreams force us to disengage from the ego's narrow, problem-solving mindset and enter into a more holistically symbolic way of being. Their nonsense is actually a higher form of sense, one that can hold paradox and communicate emotional truths that linear language cannot capture. The dream is a work of art produced by your own personal, in-house creative genius every single night. Learning to appreciate this art form is learning to appreciate the wisdom of your own depths. We have seen how dreams act as an internal communication system, a symbolic language through which the deeper self sends messages to the conscious ego. They are meaningful patterns that emerge on the inside. In the theater of the mind, this naturally leads to a profound question. If the universe speaks to us through meaningful patterns within our minds, could it also be speaking to us through meaningful patterns in the world outside? What are we to make of those uncanny moments of meaningful coincidence? When an inner event, like a thought or a dream, is suddenly mirrored by an outer event in a way that defies all probability and strikes us with a sense of awe and significance. It is as if the inner world and the outer world have momentarily conspired to deliver a single, unified message. This is the territory we explore next. The mysterious principle that weaves together the inner and outer worlds into a single tapestry of meaning. We are moving from the language of dreams to the language of synchronicity. Having learned to listen to the inner language of dreams, we now turn our attention to one of the most mysterious and mind-bending concepts in all of psychology. A principle that bridges the gap between our inner world and the outer world, between mind and matter. This is the phenomenon that Jung called synchronicity. We have all experienced it in small ways. You think of a song you haven't heard in years, and you turn on the radio, and there it is. You are struggling with a difficult life problem, and you randomly open a book to a passage that speaks directly to your situation. Most of the time, we dismiss these moments with a shrug and the words, "What a coincidence." But what if it's more than that? What if some of these events are not just random chance, but moments of profound, orchestrated meaning? Jung defines synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence of an inner psychic state with an outer physical event, where there is no discernible causal connection between the two. The inner thought did not cause the outer event to happen, nor did the outer event cause the thought. They simply happened together, linked not by cause and effect, but by a shared meaning for the person who observes them. This concept challenges the very bedrock of our modern scientific worldview, which is built almost exclusively on the principle of causality. We believe that for every effect, there must be a preceding, measurable cause. It is the logic of billiard balls. A hits B, causing B to move. But Jung, through his clinical work and his studies of physics and ancient philosophy, came to believe that causality is only one of the organizing principles of the universe. He proposed that there is another, complementary principle at work, and a causal connecting principle, which is synchronicity. While causality explains the how of the physical world, synchronicity points to the what for, the meaning, the why of our psychological world. It suggests that the universe is not just a giant, clockwork machine of cause and effect, but is also a living tapestry of meaning, and that at certain moments of heightened emotional significance, we can glimpse the underlying pattern that weaves our inner life and the outer world together. So what creates the conditions for these moments of magic? Jung theorized that synchronistic events are most likely to occur when an archetype from the collective unconscious has been activated or constellated. When we are in a state of intense emotion, facing a major life transition, grappling with a profound question, or in a moment of deep creative insight, an archetype is energized. This activated archetype acts like a powerful magnetic field, temporarily organizing both psychic events, our thoughts and feelings, and physical events around a single theme. The synchronicity is the moment this invisible organizing field becomes visible. It is as if the archetype creates a ripple that passes through the fabric of reality itself, aligning the inner and outer worlds in a pattern of meaning. The universe, for a brief moment, arranges itself around your inner state to deliver a message. The most famous example of this, the story that became the foundation of Jung's theory, occurred during his treatment of a particular patient. She was a highly intelligent woman, but her therapy had become completely stalled. She was trapped in a hyper-rational, Cartesian worldview, and she dismissed every insight Jung offered. Her own intellect had become a fortress that was preventing her from healing. One day, She was telling Jung about a powerful dream she'd had the night before. In the dream, someone had given her a priceless piece of jewelry in the shape of a golden scarab beetle. The scarab, in ancient Egyptian mythology, is a classic symbol of death and rebirth. A perfect image for the transformation she so desperately needed but was consciously resisting. As she was describing the dream, Jung heard a gentle tapping sound against his office window. He turned, opened the window, and caught a small insect as it flew into the room. It was a Setonia aurata, a common rose chafer beetle, whose green-gold metallic coloring makes it the closest European equivalent to the Egyptian scarab. He walked back to his patient and held out his hand. "Here," he said calmly, "is your scarab." The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The woman was so shocked by this impossible event that her rigid, rational fortress was shattered. The experience broke through her intellectual defenses and opened her up to the reality of an irrational, mysterious dimension of life. The therapeutic stalemate was broken, and her healing could finally begin. This story perfectly illustrates the key components. There was the inner psychic event, the dream of the scarab. There was the outer physical event, the arrival of the beetle. There was no conceivable causal link between the two. And most importantly, there was the profound, transformative meaning for the observer. The event was the universe conspiring to give this woman exactly the experience she needed to break free from her self-imposed prison. These events are not things we can manufacture or control through force of will. However, we can cultivate an awareness that makes us more likely to notice them. It requires a shift from a purely rational, controlling mindset to one of curiosity, openness, and wonder. It means paying close attention to your inner life, your dreams, your moods, your intuitions. When a striking coincidence happens, instead of immediately explaining it away, pause it. Hold the mystery of it. Ask yourself, if this were a message, what might it be trying to tell me about my life right now? What inner theme is the world reflecting back to me? Living synchronistically feels like entering into a dialogue with the universe. It provides a sense of guidance, of affirmation, that you are on the right path, that your inner journey is seen and acknowledged by the world around you. The paradox of synchronicity is that it asks us to hold two seemingly contradictory models of reality at the same time. Yes, the world operates on principles of cause and effect, and the world also operates on a causal principle of meaning. It suggests that the rigid separation we make between mind and matter, between observer and observed, is not as absolute as we believe. It points to a deeper, underlying reality. What Jung, borrowing a term from alchemy, called the unus mundus, the one world, a unified reality in which the physical and the psychical are just two different aspects of the same thing. Synchronicity is our glimpse into that unified field. It is the universe winking at you. A playful and profound reminder that you are not just a random collection of atoms in a meaningless cosmos, but a conscious participant in a living, intelligent, and meaningful mystery. We have seen how dreams are the language the universe uses to speak to us from within, and how synchronicity is the language it uses to speak to us from without. Both are expressions of meaning, of an ordering intelligence that transcends our conscious ego. This leads us to the ultimate question: if archetypes, when activated, can organize both our inner and outer worlds into patterns of meaning. What is the central break.com? Governing archetype that organizes the entire system. What is the source of this meaning? The heart of the mystery itself. If synchronicity is a wink from the universe, who or what is the eye that is winking? To answer this, we must journey to the very center of the psychic cosmos. To meet the archetype of order, wholeness, and divinity itself, we must now explore the archetype of the self. We have followed the path of meaning from the inner world of dreams to the outer world of synchronicity. And at every turn, we have found ourselves asking, what is the source of this meaning? What is the intelligence that weaves these patterns, that sends these messages, that seems to guide our lives toward a hidden purpose? We now arrive at the heart of the mystery, the central, governing archetype of the entire psychic cosmos. It is the source and the goal of the individuation journey. The archetype of wholeness, order, and divinity itself. Jung called it the self. Understanding the self requires a radical reorientation of our psychological map. For most of our lives, we experience the ego as the center of our universe. The ego is the hero of our story, the one who thinks, feels, and acts. But the self reveals this to be a profound illusion. The ego is not the center of the total personality. It is merely the center of consciousness. The self is the center of the entire psyche. The conscious and the vast unconscious combined. The relationship between the ego and the self is best understood through an astronomical metaphor. The ego is the earth, and the self is the sun. For millennia, humanity lived under the illusion that the earth was the center of the universe, and that the great, fiery Sunday dutifully revolved around it. This is the natural, naive perspective of the ego. But the Copernican revolution revealed the deeper truth. The earth is not the center. It is a much smaller body that revolves around the immense, life-giving furnace of the sun. The sun is the true center, the source of all light, all energy, and all order in our solar system. In the same way, a psychological Copernican revolution is the turning point of a conscious life. It is the moment we realize our small, personal ego is not the center of our being, but rather a satellite that revolves around the true, blazing center, which is the self. The self is the organizing principle of our total being, the source of our deepest wisdom, our most authentic creative impulses, and our innate drive toward wholeness. It is the God within, the inner voice that knows our true path. Our unique purpose. Experiences of the self are what constitute the core of what we call spiritual or mystical experiences. They are the moments when the boundaries of our small, personal ego seem to dissolve, and we feel a profound sense of connection to something larger, eternal, and sacred. In these moments, we are no longer just a separate, isolated individual. We are part of a unified, living whole. Words like awe, reverence, bliss, and a sense of homecoming are often used to describe these encounters. Jung argued that the primary function of the world's great religious traditions has always been to provide a system of symbols, rituals, and myths that could connect the conscious ego of the individual to the transpersonal, numinous power of the self. The figure of Christ for a Christian, or the concept of Atman or Brahman for a Hindu, or the Tao for a Taoist, are all culturally specific symbols for this universal archetype of wholeness. When these traditional containers lose their psychological vitality for an individual or a culture, people are left with a sense of meaninglessness and spiritual hunger. It then becomes the task of the individual to forge their own direct, personal relationship with this inner divine source, the most universal and spontaneous symbol of the self, which appears in the dreams and art of all cultures throughout history, is the mandala. The word is Sanskrit for circle, but a mandala is more than just a simple shape. It is a symbol of cosmic and psychic order. Typically, a mandala is a circular design with a distinct center point. It is often divided into 4 sections by a cross or a square. This structure is a perfect map of the self. The circle represents the totality and wholeness of the psyche. The center point represents the origin. The self is the unmoving source from which everything else emanates, and the fourfold structure represents the balancing and integration of the opposites. The 4 functions of consciousness: thinking and feeling, sensation and intuition. The creation or contemplation of a mandala can have a powerful therapeutic and centering effect in moments of psychic chaos and fragmentation. The psyche will often spontaneously produce mandala images in dreams. Jung discovered that encouraging his patients to draw or paint mandalas helped them to organize their inner world, to find a point of stability amidst the turmoil. The mandala is a snapshot of the soul, a visual representation of the self's innate ordering principle at work. From the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals to the sand paintings of Navajo healers, humanity has always used this sacred circle to give form to its deepest intuition of wholeness. This brings us to the ultimate paradox of the self, a paradox that stretches the limits of logical thought. The self is simultaneously the most personal thing in existence and the most universal. On one hand, the self is the blueprint for your unique, individual wholeness. It is the fulfillment of your specific potential. My self is not yourself. It is the most authentic core of my being. On the other hand, the self is transpersonal and universal. It is the God image imprinted upon every human soul. It is the shared divinity that connects us all. It is both the singular point at the center of your being and the all-encompassing circumference that contains the entire universe. It is the smallest and the largest thing at once. To truly grasp this is to understand that the path to the divine does not lie in escaping our humanity, but in embracing it more fully. The more we become our own unique, authentic self, the more we embody the universal self, the more deeply personal our journey becomes, the more we find it is the journey of all beings. The oak tree, in becoming the most perfect and complete version of its own oakness, simultaneously becomes the most perfect expression of the universal archetype of the tree. We have arrived at the summit, the organizing principle that gives meaning to all the other archetypes and to the journey itself. The self is the author of our dreams, the arranger of our synchronicities, and the ultimate goal of our lifelong quest for individuation. It is the promise of a wholeness that is not abstract, but is our deepest, most innate potential. Knowing this intellectually, however, is not the same as living it. The entire drama and challenge of a conscious life unfolds in the relationship between the brave but limited captain of the ship, the ego, and the vast, intelligent, and mysterious ocean of the self. How does the ego learn to listen to the self? What does a healthy relationship between them look like? And what happens when that vital connection is broken, leading to states of inflation or alienation? To understand the practical application of this profound truth, we must now explore the crucial, dynamic, and often fraught relationship that defines our lives: the ego-self axis. We have arrived at the summit of our inner world, the sacred, ordering principle of the self. But knowing that the sun is the center of the solar system is not the same as living a life that is warmed and nourished by its light. The entire drama of a conscious, meaningful human life is contained within the dynamic relationship between the ego, our center of consciousness, and the self, the center of our total being. Jung referred to the vital, energetic connection between these two centers as the ego-self axis. The health, strength, and flexibility of this axis determines the quality of our lives, the depth of our meaning, and our capacity for growth. To understand this crucial dynamic, let us use a powerful metaphor. Imagine your psyche is a kingdom. The ego is the king or queen who sits on the throne, the executive ruler. The king is the one who deals with foreign dignitaries, who signs laws, who commands the army, who is responsible for the day-to-day governance of the kingdom. His role is active, conscious, and absolutely essential. A kingdom without a ruler descends into chaos. However, a wise ruler knows that their own personal perspective is limited. In the quiet chambers of the palace, away from the public court, lives the king's most trusted advisor. This advisor is an ancient, wise figure who has no desire for personal power or public glory, but who holds the deepest knowledge of the kingdom's history, its laws, its people, and its ultimate destiny. This advisor is the self, In a healthy, flourishing kingdom, the ego self-axis is strong and open. The king, secure in his authority, regularly seeks the counsel of the wise advisor. He listens with humility and respect, even when the advice is difficult or counterintuitive. He takes this deep wisdom, integrates it with the practical realities of the court, and then makes his decisions. He still rules, he still acts, but his actions are now informed by a perspective far greater than his own. The kingdom prospers because its governance is aligned with its deeper purpose. This represents a healthy human being, a person whose conscious actions are in harmony with their soul's intent. Their life feels meaningful and guided, not because they have all the answers, but because they are in a constant, respectful dialogue with the source of the answers within them. But what happens when this vital axis is broken? There are two primary ways this can happen, leading to two distinct forms of psychic suffering. The first is inflation. In this state, the king, puffed up with his own success and power, decides he no longer needs his advisor. He might even declare, "I don't need advice. I am the wisdom of the kingdom." He locks the advisor away in a tower and begins to rule by his own decree. This is the ego identifying with the power and wisdom of the self. The king becomes a tyrant. He grows arrogant, rigid, and out of touch with the real needs of his people, because he is no longer listening to the source of wisdom. This is the state of the person who believes they are infallible, the guru who mistakes their small personal insight for ultimate enlightenment, the zealot so convinced of their own righteousness that they become cruel. An inflated ego leads to a life of hubris, a brittle and defensive existence that is terrified of anything that might challenge its self-proclaimed divinity. And in mythology, as in life, such hubris always, inevitably, leads to a nemesis, a downfall, a painful return to reality. The second form of a broken axis is alienation. This is perhaps the most common malady of the modern world. In this state, the king is still on the throne, but the line of communication to the wise advisor has been severed. Perhaps he has forgotten the advisor exists, or the noise of the court is so loud, he can no longer hear the quiet voice from the inner chamber. The king feels weak, insecure, and fraudulent. He is a ruler who has lost his connection to the very purpose of his own kingdom. His decisions are reactive, driven by fear and the shifting opinions of his courtiers, which represent the external pressures of society and the collective. He feels a profound sense of meaninglessness, anxiety, and depression. He is adrift in a chaotic and purposeless world. This is the state of so many people today. People who have achieved a measure of outer success but feel an inner emptiness, a quiet desperation. Their ego is functioning. They are managing their lives, but it is a life cut off from the nourishing, life-giving source of the self. The kingdom may look fine on the outside, but inside, the throne room is cold, and the king is profoundly alone. So how do we repair and cultivate a healthy ego self-axis? It is the great work of a conscious life. It means the king must deliberately choose to turn away from the noise of the outer court and reopen the door to the inner chamber. It is about learning to listen. The self is always speaking, always sending messages through the channels we have explored. Through dreams, through synchronicities, through the quiet intuitions and callings of the heart. The practice is to take these messages seriously. It means recording your dreams and spending time with them. It means paying attention to the meaningful coincidences in your life. It means carving out time for silence and reflection, so the still, small voice of the self can be heard. Jung's primary technique for this was active imagination, a method of consciously entering into a dialogue with figures from the unconscious. It is, in our metaphor, the king scheduling a formal council meeting with his wise advisor, asking direct questions and respectfully listening to the answers. It is a disciplined practice of turning inward and honoring the wisdom that resides there. This leads us to the final, crucial paradox of this relationship. What kind of king is capable of this dialogue? A weak and fragile king would be terrified and overwhelmed by the profound wisdom of the advisor. A tyrannical, inflated king refuses to listen at all. Therefore, paradoxically, it takes a strong, stable, and secure ego to be able to surrender to the self. You need a well-developed sense of self, a healthy I, to have the humility and courage to say, I don't have all the answers, and I am willing to listen to a perspective greater than my own. The task of the first half of life is often about building a competent ego, a king who can effectively rule the kingdom and navigate the outer world. The great task of the second half of life is to teach this strong king how to subordinate his own will to the will of the self, to become a conscious servant of the soul's purpose. It is the journey from being a ruler to being a steward of a sacred trust. The health of this inner relationship, this ego self-axis, is the primary determinant of our inner well-being. But this inner drama does not stay confined within our own minds. The state of our inner kingdom inevitably shapes our outer world. An inner life defined by inflation or alienation will necessarily create external relationships that are fraught with conflict, misunderstanding, and pain. The unresolved battles within us are always projected onto the screens of the people we are closest to. Our relationships, particularly our most intimate ones, become the stage upon which our inner world is made visible. It is in the mirror of the other that we are given our greatest opportunity to see the state of our own soul, the state of our inner world. The health of that vital ego self-axis is never a purely private affair. It inevitably spills out and shapes the world we live in. And nowhere is this more true than in the charged, intimate, and often chaotic arena of our personal relationships. Our relationships, especially our romantic partnerships, function as a sacred and often painfully accurate mirror, reflecting back to us not only our conscious selves, but all the disowned, unconscious parts of our psyche. We think we are interacting with another person, but most of the time, we are interacting with a complex mixture of that person and the projected contents of our own soul. The primary psychological mechanism at play here is one we have touched on before: the powerful and automatic act of projection. Projection is an unconscious process where we take a part of our own inner landscape, a trait, a désir, a wound, or an unlived potential that we cannot see or accept in ourselves, and we cast it out, attributing it to another person. It is not something we do consciously or maliciously. It is the psyche's default way of dealing with any content that threatens the ego's stability. If a part of ourselves is too dark, too bright, too shameful, or too frightening to own, we simply hang it on the coat rack of someone else. The two primary contents we project onto our partners are our shadow and our anima or animus. Shadow projection is the source of so much relational conflict. We become irritated, judgmental, or even obsessed with a particular negative quality in our partner. We might accuse them of being selfish, controlling, blasé, or emotionally unavailable. While there may be a grain of truth in our observation, the enormous emotional energy and righteousness behind our complaint is often a sign that we are projecting. The partner has become the convenient screen for a part of our own shadow that we refuse to see in ourselves. We are essentially having a furious argument with our own reflection, while the other person stands by in confusion. This is the root of the blame game. The endless cycle of accusation and counter-accusation where both parties feel like misunderstood victims, because neither is willing to own their side of the unconscious dynamic. The projection of the anima or animus, as we've seen, is the very stuff of romantic love and infatuation. A man projects his inner soul image, his anima, onto a woman, and is instantly captivated. He is in love with his own soul, and she is the vessel for it. A woman projects her animus, and sees in a man the embodiment of spirit, meaning, and authority. This creates the initial, intoxicating magic of a relationship, the feeling of having found one's other half. But this is a dangerous illusion. We are not half people looking for another half to complete us. We are whole people who must learn to integrate our own inner halves. When the initial projection begins to fade, as it always must, and the real, flawed human being emerges from behind the divine image, a crisis often occurs. We feel disappointed, betrayed, or convinced that our partner has changed. In reality, we have simply started to see them for who they are, separate from our own unconscious needs. Let us imagine a common scenario. We'll call them Sarah and Tom. Sarah grew up with a deep passion for art, but her practical family encouraged her to pursue a stable career in finance. She is successful, but a part of her soul, her creative, spontaneous side, was relegated to her shadow. She meets Tom, a musician who lives a bohemian, financially precarious life. She is instantly drawn to his freedom, his soulfulness, his artistic integrity. She has projected her own unlived artist onto him. For a time, their relationship is a perfect, unconscious bargain. He provides the soulfulness she lacks in her own life, and she provides the financial stability he lacks in his. But soon, the conflict begins. She resents his lack of ambition and financial discipline, nagging him to be more responsible. He, in turn, resents her for being too conventional and materialistic, projecting his own repressed need for order and security onto her. Their arguments are never truly about money or music. They are fighting about the unlived parts of their own lives. Sarah is angry at Tom because he is not living out her projected artistic dreams successfully enough. And Tom is angry at Sarah for representing the conventional life he both fears and secretly desires. They are locked in a painful dance, each one demanding that the other be something that they themselves have failed to become. From this perspective, relationships can seem like a hopeless trap, a neurotic, shared psychosis for two. But Jung offers us a more profound and hopeful view. He invites us to see our relationships as the primary alchemical vessel for the work of individuation. The intense emotions of love, rage, jealousy, and disappointment are the fire that heats the vessel, creating the necessary conditions for transformation. The pain of conflict is not a sign that the relationship is failing. It is a signal that a projection has been struck. In a neurotic relationship, this moment of pain leads to blame. In a conscious relationship, it leads to a moment of sacred inquiry. The question shifts from the accusatory, "Why are you doing this to me?" to the courageous and introspective, "Why is this causing such a strong reaction in me? What part of myself is this person showing me? What projection of mine has just been shattered?" This is the profound act of withdrawing a projection. It is taking back the piece of your own soul that you have handed over to another. It is the beginning of taking full responsibility for your own wholeness. This is the ultimate paradox of love and relationship. Our most intimate connections are, for most of us, the source of our greatest suffering. No one can wound us like the one we love. They hold a mirror up to our ugliest parts, or deepest insecurities, and our most painful unmet needs. And yet, for this very reason, they offer us the most direct and powerful path to self-knowledge and healing. The partner who drives you the most crazy is often your greatest guru, because they are showing you, with pinpoint accuracy, the next piece of your own inner work. If you can resist the urge to blame them or run away, and instead find the courage to look into that relational mirror and see your own reflection, the relationship is transformed from a battlefield into a crucible for the soul. It becomes a container, not where two half people try to complete each other, but where two whole people commit to the difficult, sacred work of supporting each other's journey toward becoming the unique individuals they were always meant to be. The suffering we experience in relationships, this dance of projection and the painful process of its withdrawal, is a concentrated form of a broader psychological truth. The anxieties, conflicts, and disappointments of life are not random afflictions. They are not signs that we have failed or taken a wrong turn. From the Jungian perspective, all psychological suffering, all neurosis, has a purpose. It is a message, a cry from the soul that we have become one-sided, that our conscious life has lost its connection to our inner truth. It is a call to grow. The intricate dance of projection and insight within our relationships often leads to pain, a sign that our inner world is out of balance. This suffering, however, is not unique to our partnerships. It is a specific expression of a more universal human experience, the experience of neurosis. In our modern world, we have been taught to view neurosis, a term that encompasses conditions like anxiety, depression, phobias, and obsessions, as a kind of mechanical failure. We see it as a chemical imbalance or a faulty wiring in the brain, a disease to be managed, medicated, and, if possible, eliminated. From a Jungian perspective, this view, while not entirely incorrect, is dangerously incomplete. For Jung, a neurosis is not primarily a disease to be cured. It is a message to be understood. It is a sign of a profound inner division, a split between the conscious personality and the deeper instincts of the soul. A neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has been deprived of its meaning, and its symptoms are a desperate cry for attention. Imagine a river that is meant to flow to the sea. This is the natural flow of our psychic energy, or libido, toward the goal of individuation and wholeness. Now imagine a dam is built across that river. A dam constructed by the ego's fears, by rigid social conditioning, or by a one-sided way of life. The water can no longer flow forward. What happens? It backs up. It stagnates. It begins to exert immense pressure on the dam, finding cracks and weaknesses through which to burst forth in destructive ways. This is the nature of neurosis. The symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, the irrational fears, are the energy of our own unlived life, of our own thwarted potential, erupting in distorted forms. The anxiety is the sound of the river roaring against the dam. The depression is the stagnant swamp that forms when the water has nowhere to go. These symptoms are not the problem. They are the result of the problem. They are the smoke, not the fire. To merely medicate the symptoms without understanding their source is like constantly repainting a wall that has a leaking pipe behind it. It may cover up the damage for a time, but it does nothing to address the fundamental issue. Jung proposed a radical idea, that the neurosis itself contains the seed of its own cure. The specific form that our suffering takes is not random. It is a highly symbolic drama that points directly to what has been lost or neglected. A person who develops a crippling fear of public speaking might be someone who has a powerful, unacknowledged voice within them, a truth they are meant to share with the world. And their soul is creating this intense conflict to force the issue. A person who becomes a workaholic, obsessed with productivity, might be fleeing from a sense of inner emptiness and a fear of stillness. And the inevitable burnout is the psyche's way of forcing a necessary retreat. The illness is not an enemy to be conquered, but a riddle to be solved. The cure lies not in fighting the symptom, but in asking, why this symptom? Why now? What part of my life have I abandoned that it must now return in this painful and distorted form? Let us consider the story of a man we'll call David. David is, by all external measures, a tremendous success. He is a partner at a prestigious law firm. He is wealthy, respected, and has a picture-perfect family. His persona is flawless, but as he enters his early 40s, he begins to suffer from a deep, unshakable depression, a gray fog that robs his life of all its color and joy. He feels like he is living in a cardboard cutout of a life. His doctor prescribes antidepressants, which help to manage the worst of the despair. But the underlying feeling of meaninglessness persists. in a Jungian analysis, his depression is not a random chemical event. It is a purposeful shutdown of a life that is no longer authentic. David had spent his entire life fulfilling the expectations of his ambitious father, choosing a lucrative career over his own secret, youthful passion for carpentry and working with his hands. He built a life that looked good from the outside but felt hollow on the inside. His soul, starved of genuine, hands-on creativity and a connection to the tangible world, finally went on strike. The depression is a form of passive resistance, a forced withdrawal of energy from the inauthentic outer life, creating a space for something new to emerge from the inside. The cure for David is not just to get rid of the depression, but to understand its message. It is a call home to himself. He begins to spend his weekends in a small workshop he builds in his garage, lovingly crafting furniture. He doesn't kid his job, but he brings his life back into a state of balance. He rediscovers a part of his soul he had abandoned 30 years earlier. The depression begins to lift, not because it was fought, but because its wisdom was heard. The river of his life has found a new, vital channel in which to flow. This leads us to the central, transformative paradox of suffering. Our culture teaches us that suffering is a negative, a sign of failure to be avoided at all costs. We are entitled to a life of comfort and happiness, and any deviation from this is a problem to be fixed. Jung offers a starkly different, more profound, and ultimately more hopeful perspective. He suggests that neurosis, at its core, is a moral conflict. It is the suffering of a human being who has not yet found the meaning of their life. And this very suffering is often the only thing powerful enough to shatter the complacent defenses of the ego and force us onto a new path. The pain is what makes us conscious. It is the grit in the oyster that creates the pearl. Our neurosis is not a sign of our weakness. It is a testament to the fact that we have a soul that refuses to be silenced, a self that will not allow us to settle for a life that is less than the one we were meant to live. It is a sacred wound, and it is through the wound that the light gets in. It is a call to abandon the comfortable but constricting prison of who we think we are, and to embark on the terrifying, exhilarating journey of becoming whole. While this call to wholeness can come at any time, Jung observed that it often arrives with a particular urgency and intensity at a specific threshold in our lives. The values, goals, and strategies that served us in the first half of our journey, the part of life dedicated to building an ego and establishing ourselves in the world, often prove to be woefully inadequate for the challenges and opportunities of the second. The neurosis that frequently erupts around midlife is often a signal that the psyche is demanding a fundamental change of attitude, a reevaluation of all that has gone before. It is the moment the soul insists that we turn our attention from the outer world to the inner ride, from the afternoon of life to the coming of the evening. We must now explore the unique psychological tasks of the second half of life. The psychological suffering we call neurosis is often a sign that our life has become one-sided, a desperate call from the soul to return to a path of wholeness. While this can happen at any age, Jung observed that it occurs with a particular frequency and intensity around the great turning point of life, the transition into what he called the second half of life. Our lives, he suggested, follow the arc of the sun. The first half, from the dawn of childhood to the high noon of midlife, is naturally and necessarily focused on the outer world. It is a time of biological and social expansion. We are building our egos, acquiring education and skills, establishing careers, building families, and finding our place in the society. The fundamental task is adaptation to external reality. But at noon, the sun reaches its zenith and begins its descent. To continue living the afternoon of life by the same program as the morning is a psychological mistake of the first order. It leads to bitterness, stagnation, and a sense of being stuck. The psyche demands a profound shift in attitude, a sacred turn inward. The second half of life is not about acquiring more, but about becoming more. The central task is no longer adaptation to the outer world, but adaptation to the inner world. It is a time for introspection, for reflection, and for coming to terms with who we have become. The questions change. In the first half, we ask, what do I want from the world? What can I achieve? In the second half, the soul begins to ask, what does the world want from me? What is the meaning of the life I have lived? Who am I, apart from my social roles and accomplishments? This inward turn is not a sign of failure or a retreat from life. It is a natural and necessary progression of the individuation journey. It is a time for cultivating the parts of ourselves that were neglected during the busy, outward-focused first half. It is a time for the soul to finally claim its due. A central and unavoidable theme of this new chapter is the development of a conscious relationship with our own finitude. In the morning of life, we live with the illusion of infinite time. The horizon of death is so distant as to be invisible. But as we pass noon, that horizon begins to draw closer. Friends and parents pass away. Our own bodies begin to show the inevitable signs of wear, and the reality of our own mortality can no longer be denied. Our culture, with its frantic worship of youth, teaches us to fear and deny this process. We see aging only as a decline, a loss, a failure. But from a psychological perspective, a conscious and courageous confrontation with death is the very thing that gives the second half of life its depth and meaning. It is the awareness that our time is limited that forces us to get serious about what truly matters. It strips away the trivialities and focuses the mind on the essential. The thought of the end of life is the great catalyst for living the remainder of our life more fully, more authentically, and more consciously. It prompts us to ask, what is my legacy? Not in terms of money or property, but in terms of wisdom, love, and the person I have become. As the ego's ambitions for power, wealth, and status begin to lose their vitality, a deeper instinct in the psyche begins to stir. Jung called this the religious function. This is not necessarily about adhering to a specific church or creed. Although for many it can be, it is the innate human need to find meaning, to establish a connection to something larger than one's own small ego, to find a guiding myth or a spiritual standpoint that makes sense of the joys and sorrows of our existence. Jung was firm in his belief that the vast majority of neuroses that appear after the age of 35 are the result of a starved religious function. They are the suffering of a soul that has found no convincing answer to the question of why we are here and what the purpose of our suffering is. The second half of life is the time when the psyche demands that we find our own personal answer to these ultimate questions. It is a quest to discover a myth to live by, one that can carry us through the final chapters of our lives with a sense of purpose and peace. The archetype that presides over this life stage is that of the senex, the wise old man or wise old woman. This figure, found in myths and fairy tales across the world, represents the positive goal of a successfully navigated second half of life. This is not just a matter of growing old. It is a matter of growing wise. The senex is a person who has lived life fully, who has drunk deeply from the cup of experience, both bitter and sweet, and has integrated those experiences into a coherent whole. They are no longer caught in the turbulent passions and urgent ambitions of the ego. They have achieved a degree of detachment, a philosophical perspective from which they can view their own life and the life of the world with a calm, compassionate wisdom. They are often the guardians of tradition, the mentors to the young, the ones who have seen it all and can offer guidance without judgment. Think of a wise grandmother whose quiet presence is a source of comfort, or a figure like Merlin, who guides the young King Arthur not by fighting his battles for him, but by offering riddles and cryptic wisdom. The task of the second half of life is to cultivate and embody this inner elder, to become a source of wisdom for ourselves and for our community. This leads us to the profound paradox of aging. In a society that worships physical strength and youthful beauty, aging is seen almost exclusively as a process of decline. And it is true. Our physical powers wane, our energy diminishes, and our bodies betray us. Yet, as this inevitable physical decline occurs, the potential for psychological and spiritual growth dramatically increases. We trade the energy of the body for the wisdom of the soul. We exchange the speed of youth for the depth of maturity. The second half of life is a profound rebalancing of our psychic economy. The energy that was once directed outward toward conquering the world is now freed up for the inner journey of conquering the self. It is an opportunity for a final, powerful flowering of consciousness, a ripening of the soul. It is the most crucial stage of individuation, where we have the chance to become the whole person we were always meant to be. We have seen that the journey into the second half of life is a sacred turn inward, a time defined by the search for meaning and the emergence of the religious function of the soul. It is a universal human journey, a natural developmental stage of the psyche. This naturally raises the question of how this personal, psychological quest for meaning relates to the great, organized spiritual traditions of the world. Did Jung see his psychology as a new form of religion, a replacement for the old ways, or did he see it as something else entirely? A tool to help modern people reconnect with the living reality that lies at the heart of all true spirituality. To understand this, we must now explore Jung's complex, subtle, and deeply respectful approach to the world of religion and the spiritual experience, the profound search for meaning that defines the second half of life. The natural stirring of the soul's religious function leads us directly to one of the most misunderstood and vital aspects of Jung's work: his relationship with spirituality. Was Jung a mystic? Was his psychology a new religion? The answer is a definitive no. Jung was, first and foremost, a scientist, an empiricist. His entire life's work was built not on faith or theological speculation, but on the careful, methodical observation of the reality of the human psyche. What he observed, in patient after patient, regardless of their creed or lack thereof, was that the soul has an innately spiritual dimension. Questions of meaning, encounters with sacred or divine imagery, and a deep yearning for connection to something larger than the self were not abnormalities. They were fundamental, universal human experiences. He did not ask us to believe in the soul. He asked us to accept its reality as an empirical fact, and to take our inner lives with the utmost seriousness. To understand Jung's approach, we must first make a crucial distinction he insisted upon: the distinction between religion and religious experience. For Jung, religion, or what he often called a creed, refers to the organized, institutionalized systems of faith. It is the church, the dogma, the sacred texts, the established rituals. Historically, he saw these creeds as immensely valuable psychological systems. They function as protective containers, providing a shared set of symbols and a structured path that helps connect the individual ego to the overwhelming power of the divine, while also protecting them from being destroyed by a direct, unmediated encounter with it. A creed is a vessel that has been collectively built over centuries to hold the water of life. A religious experience, on the other hand, is the direct experience of that water. It is a spontaneous, personal, and often overwhelming encounter with what the theologian Rudolf Otto called the numinosum, the awesome, terrifying, and fascinating mystery of the divine. This is the raw experience of the self. All great religions, Jung argued, begin with the powerful, direct religious experience of a founder, like Moses, Buddha, or Christ. The creed is what their followers build afterward to codify and transmit that original, fiery experience. The great spiritual crisis of the modern West, as Jung diagnosed it, is that for many people, the traditional religious symbols have lost their psychological vitality. The vessel of the creed has become dry and brittle. God, for many, has become an abstract intellectual concept to be believed in, rather than a living, immediate reality. to be experienced. When the symbols die, the bridge between the conscious ego and the life-giving energy of the self is broken. This, Jung believed, is the root cause of the widespread meaninglessness, alienation, and spiritual hunger of our time. When we lose our connection to a genuine, inner spiritual reality, we desperately seek substitute gods in the outer world. We may deify the state, making a nation or a political ideology our ultimate source of meaning. We may worship money and material success, or prostrate ourselves at the altar of pure rationalism, believing that science can answer all of life's questions. But these substitute gods always fail to nourish the soul, leaving us empty and adrift. The key to reconnecting with this inner source lies in understanding the function of symbols. Religious symbols, like the cross, the Buddha, or the mandala, are not just arbitrary signs. They are the natural language of the self. They are archetypal images that have the power to unite the opposites, to bridge the conscious and the unconscious. A living symbol is a transformer of psychic energy. It takes the raw, numinous power of the self and makes it accessible to the conscious mind, allowing for a genuine dialogue between the human and the divine within. When a person has a living connection to these symbols, whether through a traditional faith or through their own inner work, they have a lifeline to meaning. Jung's profound analysis of the biblical book of Job serves as the ultimate illustration of this principle. Job is a devoutly religious man. He follows the creed perfectly. He is blameless and upright. His relationship with his God, Yahweh, is based on the conventional understanding of his religion. He believes that if he is a good person, God will reward him. But he does not have a direct, personal relationship with God. When inexplicable disaster strikes, stripping him of everything he holds dear, Job is not satisfied with the easy theological answers provided by his friends. He refuses to accept that he is being punished for some unknown sin. Instead, he does something audacious. He demands a direct audience with God. He wants an answer from the source. This is the crucial turning point. In the terrifying climax of the book, God appears to Job in a whirlwind and reveals his full, paradoxical nature. This is not just the good, just father figure of Job's simple belief. This God is a terrifying, amoral force of nature, who boasts of creating the monstrous, untamable beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan. Job is confronted with the full, awesome, and terrifying reality of the divine, the union of good and evil, creation and destruction. This is a direct encounter with the numinous self in all its paradoxical wholeness. It shatters Job's one-sided, naive worldview. He is humbled, transformed, and at the end of the ordeal he declares, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." He has moved from a second-hand faith to a first-hand experience. For Jung, this journey represents the truly modern spiritual path, a path that demands the courage to move beyond inherited beliefs and to seek a direct, personal, and often terrifying encounter with the paradoxical God image within our own psyche. This brings us to the paradox of Jung's own work. He was a scientist, a doctor, a man of reason, who nonetheless insisted on the empirical reality of the soul and the profound, life-giving importance of what can only be called spiritual experience. His psychology is not a new religion to replace the old ones. It is better understood as a form of psychological seamanship. It provides the tools and the knowledge for an individual, especially one for whom the traditional ships of faith are no longer seaworthy, to build their own small vessel and learn to navigate the vast and often stormy ocean of their own soul. It does not tell you what you must believe. It shows you how to have your own experience. Jung's approach is not a passive one. It is not about simply waiting for a moment of divine grace to strike. He developed a practical, powerful, and demanding technique for actively initiating the dialogue with the unconscious. For deliberately knocking on the door of the inner temple and inviting the numinous to appear. This technique is a cornerstone of his entire therapeutic method. It is the practice of active imagination. We have established that a conscious life, particularly in its second half, depends on fostering a dialogue between the ego and the self. We have seen that the self speaks to us through the symbolic languages of dreams and synchronicity. The question then becomes, can we do more than just passively wait for these messages? Can we actively initiate the conversation? Can we consciously knock on the door of the unconscious and invite its wisdom into our lives? The answer, for Jung, was a resounding yes. He developed a powerful, disciplined, and profound technique for doing just that. It is the cornerstone of his therapeutic practice and the most potent tool for engaging in the work of individuation. He called it active imagination. It is essential to understand what active imagination is not. It is not aimless daydreaming or passive fantasizing, where the ego gets lost in a pleasant or anxious stream of images. It is not the same as positive visualization, where the ego tries to force a particular outcome or manifest a specific desire. Active imagination is a rigorous method of conscious engagement. It is a form of meditation in action, a structured dialogue with the figures of your inner world. If a dream is like finding a mysterious, unsolicited letter in your mailbox, active imagination is like picking up the phone and dialing the source of that letter directly. The key difference is the role of the conscious ego. In a daydream, the ego is a passive spectator watching a movie. In active imagination, the ego steps off its seat, climbs onto the stage, and becomes an active participant in the drama, able to speak, to question, and to be changed by the other characters. The process itself can be broken down into several distinct stages. The first is to prepare the vessel. This means finding a time and a place where you can be quiet, undisturbed, and inwardly focused. The goal is to consciously lower the threshold of consciousness, to quiet the endless chatter of the ego mind. You then need a starting point, a psychic hook on which to begin. This can be a particularly strong mood, a feeling of anxiety, sadness, or anger. You can take a powerful image from a recent dream, especially a recurring one. Or you can simply ask the unconscious to present you with an image. You hold this starting point in your mind's eye with gentle focus. The second stage is to let the image come to life. This is a moment of conscious surrender. You allow the image or the feeling to animate itself, to develop its own autonomous energy. A vague feeling of anxiety might coalesce into the image of a frightened animal trapped in a cage. A sense of depression might become a vast, gray, empty landscape. You do not force this animation. You witness it. You give it the freedom to become what it is, without the ego's censorship or direction. This leads to the third and most crucial stage, conscious participation. Once a figure, a landscape, or a scene has taken shape, your ego, your conscious I, enters the scene and engages with it. You treat the figures that appear as if they are real, autonomous beings, because psychologically, they are. They are personifications of your own unconscious complexes and archetypal energies. You can speak to them, ask them questions. Who are you? Why are you here in my psyche? What do you want from me? And then, you must listen. The answers may come in the form of words, or in a sudden feeling, or in a new image. The dialogue begins. The fourth stage is one of ethical confrontation. This is not a passive channel surfing of the unconscious. You must participate with your own full, conscious morality. The figures you meet may be wise and helpful, but they can also be dark, childish, or demanding. If a figure from your imagination asks you to do something that you find morally reprehensible, you must stand your ground. You must argue with it, question it, and hold fast to your own ethical center. You might say, I understand that you feel this rage, but I cannot and will not act on it in a destructive way in the outer world. Let us find another way. It is this honest, ethical struggle between the ego and the figures of the unconscious that builds psychological strength and character. It is how you build a relationship based on mutual respect with the powerful forces of your own soul. Finally, the experience must be given concrete form and integrated. After a session of active imagination, it is vital to record what happened. Write down the dialogue verbatim in a journal. Draw or paint the images that appeared. Sculpt the figures out of clay. This act of giving the experience physical form anchors it in reality. It prevents it from dissipating like a forgotten dream. It creates a permanent record of your inner journey. The final step is to reflect on the experience and its meaning for your life. What was the central message? How does this insight apply to your current life situation? How can you integrate this new wisdom into your conscious actions and choices? Let's walk through a brief, guided example. Imagine you have been feeling a powerful sense of creative blockage, a feeling of being stuck. You sit quietly and focus on this feeling. The image that arises is of a tall, thick, stone wall in front of you. You allow the image to become vivid. You can feel the coldness of the stone. See the moss growing in the cracks. Now, you consciously enter the scene. You walk up to the wall. You could try to smash it, to climb it, but instead, you decide to speak to it. Wall. You ask, why are you here? Why are you blocking my way? You listen intently. Perhaps you hear a deep, rumbling voice that seems to come from the stone itself. I am not here to block you. It says, I am here to protect the garden on the other side. The ground is fallow. It needs time to rest. You cannot force things to grow. This is a revelation. The wall is not an enemy. It is a guardian. The blockage is not a failure. It is a necessary period of rest. The dialogue might continue, but the core insight has been delivered. You would then record this dialogue, perhaps drawing the wall and the garden. And you would integrate the message by consciously giving yourself permission to rest, to read, to incubate, trusting that this fallow period is a necessary part of the creative cycle. The profound paradox of active imagination is that it requires a simultaneous state of intense focus and complete surrender. It is a deliberate, willed act of letting go of the will. The ego must be strong enough to initiate the journey, to ask the questions, and to hold its ethical ground. But it must also be humble enough to allow the unconscious to reveal something entirely new, unexpected, and often challenging to the ego's own perspective. It is the ultimate exercise in holding the tension of the opposites. This practice of facilitating a conscious dialogue between the opposing forces of the psyche does more than just provide insight. The very act of holding that tension creates something new. It generates a healing third, a reconciling symbol, a new attitude that transcends both the ego's initial position and the raw energy of the unconscious. This emergent, creative, and healing principle, born from the sacred marriage of opposites, has a name in Jungian psychology. It is the transcendent function. Through the disciplined practice of active imagination, we create a sacred space for a dialogue between the conscious ego and the autonomous figures of the unconscious. We have seen that this is not merely a method for gaining insight, but a process of deep, ethical engagement. When this dialogue is held, when the tension between the opposing viewpoints of the conscious and the unconscious is maintained with courage and integrity, something truly remarkable can happen. The psyche, in its innate wisdom, has the capacity to create a way forward, a new path that was previously invisible. This natural, healing process of conflict resolution and psychological growth is what Jung called the transcendent function. The name can be misleading. It is transcendent not because it is mystical or otherworldly, but because it transcends the opposition. It is the psyche's ability to create a third position that goes beyond the two opposing poles. uniting them in a new synthesis that is greater than the sum of its parts. To understand how this works, we must first appreciate that the very structure of the psyche is a dynamic field of opposites. We are constantly navigating the tension between consciousness and the unconscious, the ego and the shadow, thinking and feeling, intuition and sensation, the persona and the soul. A healthy life is not a life free from this tension. A healthy life is one that has the strength and flexibility to hold it. In fact, this tension is the very source of our psychic energy, or libido. It is the engine of all growth. Think of a simple battery. It only produces electricity because of the potential difference between its positive and negative poles. Without the opposition, there is no energy. Similarly, without the tension of opposites in the psyche, there is no energy for consciousness, no impetus for change. A person who tries to live a life free of all conflict, who represses every negative thought and avoids every difficult emotion, is essentially trying to create a battery with only a positive pole. The result is not a state of blissful peace, but a state of psychic death, a flat, lifeless existence. The transcendent function is the mechanism that converts the raw energy of this inner conflict into new consciousness. It can only be activated when the ego resists its natural temptation to solve the conflict prematurely. When faced with an unbearable opposition, the ego has two common, neurotic reactions. The first is repression. It chooses one side, usually its own conscious viewpoint, and tries to violently suppress the other. The second is to collapse into the opposite pole, to give up its own position entirely and be overwhelmed by the unconscious, the courageous. Third option is to hold the tension. It is to stand in the middle of the fire, acknowledging the validity of both the conscious thesis and the unconscious antithesis, without choosing a side. It is a state of active, patient not knowing. It is in this crucible of contained suffering that the transcendent function can be born. The agent of this function, the thing that is created in the fire, is the living symbol. When the ego holds the tension, the psyche can spontaneously produce a symbol, often in a dream or a moment of active imagination, that unites the opposites. This symbol is not an intellectual invention. It is a living, energetic reality that is born from the marriage of the conscious and the unconscious. Let's take a common conflict: the opposition between our desire for absolute freedom and adventure, and our equally powerful need for security, stability, and commitment. A neurotic solution is to either live a reckless, uncommitted life, or a rigid, overly cautious one. But if one holds the tension between these two powerful desires, the transcendent function might produce a symbol, perhaps a dream of a great eagle that builds a solid, immovable nest on the highest mountain peak. This symbol, the nested eagle, unites the opposites. It is not a compromise. It is a new, third reality that contains both freedom and commitment, soaring flight and a secure home. Contemplating this symbol provides a new way of seeing the problem, a path forward that honors both sides of the soul. The German philosopher Hegel's concept of the dialectic offers a perfect philosophical parallel to this psychological process. Hegel described a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The thesis is the established point of view, the status quo. For our purposes, this is the conscious attitude of the ego. For example, I must be a perfectly disciplined, rational, and productive person. Then, from the unconscious, an opposing force erupts, the antithesis. This might manifest as a sudden wave of depression, extreme laziness, or a flood of irrational emotions. This is the soul rebelling against the one-sidedness of the ego. The neurotic stalemate occurs when the ego either tries to double down on the thesis, I just need more self-control, or collapses completely into the antithesis, I'm a worthless failure, I can't do anything. The path of consciousness, however, is to hold the tension between the thesis and the antithesis. To acknowledge the truth in both. The truth is, yes, a degree of discipline is necessary, but the truth also is, my soul is exhausted and needs rest and a connection to the irrational. By holding this painful contradiction, a synthesis can emerge. The synthesis is the product of the transcendent function. It might be a new understanding of work-life balance, the decision to pursue a career that feels more soulful and less like a grind, or the development of a personality that can be both productive and playful. This synthesis is not a halfway point. It is a higher level of consciousness that integrates the valid claims of both original positions. It is absolutely vital to understand that this is not an intellectual exercise. You cannot simply sit down and think your way to a synthesis. The ego is the very thing that is stuck in a one-sided position, so it cannot be the agent of its own solution. The transcendent function is an experiential process, a lived reality. It requires surrendering the ego's arrogant need to be in control and trusting in the innate healing wisdom of the psyche itself. It means enduring periods of confusion, anxiety, and disorientation, waiting patiently in the dark for the new light to dawn. This is why practices like active imagination are so important. They create the container, the alchemical vessel, where the ego can practice this surrender and where the fire of tension can be held safely until the transformation occurs. The ultimate paradox of the transcendent function is that true and lasting resolution to our deepest conflicts comes not from winning a battle, but from surrendering to a process. It is not about the ego choosing one side and defeating the other, but about the ego having the strength and humility to hold both sides in a loving, conscious embrace until the psyche, in its own time, gives birth to a new, more complete reality. It is the psychological art of creation, not conquest. It is the secret of turning the lead of our inner turmoil into the gold of a more conscious, more integrated, and more compassionate self. This profound inner process, this alchemical art of reconciling opposites, is not just a model for individual therapy. It is a powerful and desperately needed lens through which to view the conflicts of our world. Our modern society is torn apart by warring opposites, by political, religious, and social factions that are locked in a neurotic stalemate, where each side sees the other as pure evil to be defeated and eliminated. A Jungian perspective would suggest that our collective suffering will only deepen until we learn to apply the wisdom of the transcendent function on a global scale. Until we find the collective courage to hold the tension of our differences and seek a higher synthesis. To do that, we must first understand the psychological state of our time. We must dare to look at the shadow of modernity, the inner alchemical process of the transcendent function, the art of holding the tension of opposites to create a new synthesis, is not merely a model for our individual healing. It is also the essential lens through which we must view the profound psychological sickness of our time. For a society, like an individual, can become neurotic. A culture, like a person, can become dangerously one-sided, and in doing so, can fall prey to the destructive forces of its own unacknowledged shadow. When we apply a Jungian framework to our modern world, the diagnosis is both clear and deeply unsettling. We are living in an age of profound psychic imbalance. An age that has identified so completely with one side of human potential that it has lost its soul in the process. The collective consciousness of the modern West has become overwhelmingly identified with what we might call the masculine principle of logos. We worship at the altar of reason, logic, science, and technology. Our collective ego is a master of the material world. We have split the atom. We have mapped the genome. We have built a global network of instantaneous communication. We have achieved a level of power and control over external reality that would have seemed like divine magic to our ancestors. But in achieving this mastery, we have committed a grave psychic crime. We have systematically devalued, repressed, and cast into shadow the corresponding feminine principle of eros. the world of feeling, of intuition, of relatedness, of inner experience, and our connection to the living mystery of nature. All of this has been deemed inferior, primitive, irrational, and irrelevant. Our world is suffering from a tyrannical, one-sided consciousness, and the results are all around us. This rampant materialism and rationalism has led to what the sociologist Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world. We no longer see the cosmos as a living, intelligent mystery in which we are participants. We see it as a dead, clockwork machine, a collection of resources to be managed, controlled, and exploited for our own ends. Our relationship with the natural world has shifted from one of reverence to one of utility. We have cut ourselves off from our roots, from the wisdom of the earth, and now stand on the brink of ecological catastrophe. Surprised that the machine we have been plundering is beginning to break down, this disenchantment also applies to our own inner lives. In a world that believes only what can be measured is real, the soul itself becomes a fiction. The rich, symbolic life of dreams, myths, and spiritual longing is dismissed as unscientific fantasy, leading to the profound sense of meaninglessness, alienation, and spiritual starvation that haunts the modern individual. When an entire society represses its shadow, that darkness does not simply vanish. It is projected on a massive, terrifying scale. The unacknowledged greed, aggression, and lust for power of the collective are cast out and hung upon the figure of an enemy. This is the psychological engine of mass psychosis, and it is the defining feature of our contemporary political and social landscape. Look at the venomous, irrational hatred that defines our political polarization. Each side sees the other not as a group of fellow citizens with different ideas, but as a monolithic embodiment of pure evil. They are seen as morally corrupt, stupid, and traitorous, a fundamental threat to the very soul of the nation. This level of intense, emotional projection is a classic symptom of a collective neurosis. We are no longer debating policy. We are engaged in a holy war against our own projected shadow. Each side is desperately fighting the darkness it cannot and will not see within itself. This mass psychosis is fueled by the loss of a unifying, living mythology. In healthier times, the great archetypal forces of the psyche were contained and channeled through shared religious and cultural rituals. The myths provided a story, a grand narrative that explained our place in the cosmos and gave meaning to our struggles. The rituals provided a safe, structured way to encounter the numinous, to honor the gods, and to engage with the shadow. With the death of these living myths, the archetypal forces have not disappeared. They have broken free from their sacred containers and now run rampant in the secular world. The political arena has become the new temple. Political rallies have taken on the ecstatic fervor of religious revivals. We inflate our political leaders into messianic saviors or demonic villains. We have poured all the psychic energy that once belonged to the realm of the soul into the profane world of power politics. And the result is a toxic, hysterical, and dangerously unstable collective psyche. This brings us to the tragic paradox of progress. We have progressed in every conceivable external metric. We are wealthier, healthier, safer, and more technologically advanced than any society in human history. We have the powers of gods at our fingertips. But have we progressed psychologically? Have we become wiser, happier, or more conscious? The evidence suggests the opposite. We are a society riddled with anxiety, depression, addiction, and loneliness. Our public discourse is a spectacle of rage and bad faith. Our incredible technological power is not guided by a corresponding moral or spiritual wisdom. We are, as Jung himself warned, like children who have been given a box of matches in a warehouse filled with dynamite. Our intellectual and technological development has catastrophically outpaced our psychological and emotional maturity. This is the great, Defining danger of our time. The greatest threat to our future is not an external enemy. It is the untamed, unconscious, and projected shadow within the modern human soul. What, then, is the antidote? How can such a widespread collective sickness be healed? Jung was adamant on this point. A collective is nothing more than a group of individuals. Therefore, a collective can only be healed by the conscious transformation of the individuals within it. We cannot wait for our political leaders, our institutions, or our systems to save us, for they are all products of the very sickness they claim to be able to cure. The only effective counterforce to a mass psychosis is the conscious, stable, and individuating individual. The only way to combat the destructive power of a negative collective myth is for an individual to discover and live their own positive, personal myth. In a world that has lost its great stories and is tearing itself apart, the most radical, world-changing act is the inner work of becoming whole. This leads us to the final, essential task. In a disenchanted world, how does one find a sacred story? A personal myth that can give meaning, purpose, and direction to one's life. In the face of a collective culture that has lost its way, a world suffering from a mass psychosis of projected shadows and hollowed-out meaning, what is the individual to do? How can we remain sane in an insane world? Jung's answer is as profound as it is practical. When the great, collective myths of a society have died, the individual is tasked with the most sacred and urgent of all human endeavors, the discovery and creation of their own personal myth. A myth, in the Jungian sense, is not a falsehood or a fairy tale. It is a sacred story. It is the narrative that provides our life with meaning, purpose, and a sense of place in the cosmos. It is the story that answers the fundamental questions of the soul. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of my suffering? What is my ultimate purpose? For most of human history, these myths were provided by our culture, our tribe, or our religion. They gave us a shared map of reality. But in our fragmented, secular age, many of us are living without a myth. And this, Jung believed, is a condition as dangerous as a physical disease. To live without a myth is to be adrift in a sea of meaninglessness, vulnerable to every passing ideological current and the terrifying pull of collective delusion. The entire journey of individuation we have been exploring is, in its essence, the process of finding and living your personal myth. It is a conscious turning away from the generic, off-the-shelf stories offered by the collective, the stories that tell you to pursue wealth, or fame, or conformity, and instead, embarking on a quest to unearth the unique, sacred story that is written in the language of your own soul. The confrontation with the shadow, the integration of the anima or animus, the dialogue with the figures in your dreams. These are not just therapeutic techniques. They are the acts of a hero, gathering the clues, facing the monsters, and seeking the allies needed for their quest. The goal is to graduate from being a minor, forgotten character in a story written by someone else. Your parents, your culture, your boss, and to claim your rightful place as the protagonist in the epic of your own life. But how does one begin this quest? You do not need to journey to a distant land or consult an ancient oracle. The raw material of your myth is the story of your life itself. You must become a psychological archaeologist, digging into your own history with a new set of eyes. Look back on your life not as a random sequence of events, but as a story with a hidden plot. What are the recurring themes? What challenges appear again and again? Wearing different masks. What are the key turning points? The moments of decision that set you on a new path. What images, stories, or figures have fascinated you since childhood? These are not random interests. They are clues, signposts pointing toward the archetypal patterns that form the bedrock of your personal myth. Next, take time to reflect on your peak and nadir experiences. Identify the moments in your life of greatest joy, transcendence, and profound meaning. When did you feel most alive, most yourself? These are the moments when you were living in alignment with your myth. Equally important, identify the moments of deepest suffering. Your encounters with the abyss. What were the experiences of failure, heartbreak, and despair? A myth is not a story of uninterrupted happiness. A true myth is the story that connects these high and low points. It is the narrative that reveals how the descent into the underworld was a necessary prelude to the triumphant return. How the wound was the source of the wisdom. You can deepen this exploration with a journal, asking yourself the big questions. If your life were a novel, what would the title of your current chapter be? What is the central lie that your life has been built upon until now? What is a truth you know deep in your bones, but have been too afraid to live? If you were to personify your greatest fear and your deepest longing, what would they look like? And what would they say to each other? The answers to these questions are the living threads from which your sacred story can be woven. Let us imagine a woman named Elena. For years, Elena lived under the spell of a tragic personal myth. Her story was one of abandonment and betrayal. Beginning with a difficult childhood, her unconscious narrative was that of the unlovable victim. This myth dictated her life. She was drawn to partners who would inevitably betray her. She held jobs where she felt consistently undervalued. She saw every setback as further proof of her victimhood. Her life was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Through a process of conscious inner work, she began the heroic task of rewriting her own myth. She looked at her history with new eyes. She realized that her survival in the face of so much pain was not a sign of her weakness, but of her extraordinary resilience. The betrayals were not proof of her unlovability. They were the fire-breathing dragons she had to face in order to discover her own fierce, self-reliant strength. She consciously chose to abandon the old, disempowering myth of the victim and to adopt a new one. The myth of the alchemist, the woman who has the power to transform the lead of her suffering into the gold of her wisdom. This new story did not erase the facts of her past, but it radically transformed their meaning. And by changing the meaning of her past, she changed the possibilities of her present and her future. She was no longer a passive victim of fate. She was the active creator of her own destiny. This brings us to the final, beautiful paradox of the personal myth. As you excavate your story, it will feel intensely, uniquely your own. It is the story of your specific wounds, your particular triumphs, your secret longings. And yet, the deeper you go into your own singular narrative, the more you will discover that it is woven from the timeless, universal threads of the human condition. You will find that your personal story is a unique variation on one of the great archetypal myths of the collective unconscious. Your struggle to overcome adversity is your version of the hero's journey. Your quest to find a meaningful partnership is your version of the sacred marriage. Your work to transform your pain into art is your version of the myth of the wounded healer. In discovering what makes you most uniquely yourself, you discover your profound connection to all of humanity. Your life ceases to be a small, isolated event and becomes a vessel through which a great, eternal story is being told to the world in a way that has never been told before. In a world drowning in meaningless information, the creation of a personal myth is the ultimate act of rebellion. It is the construction of a personal cosmos in the midst of collective chaos. It is how we build a soul that is strong enough to withstand the disintegrating forces of our time. This entire journey, from facing our ego to finding our myth, has been a journey into the heart of paradox. We have learned that our greatest strength is in our weakness, our greatest light is in our darkness, and our most unique self is also our most universal. The final task, then, is to synthesize these lessons, to step back and understand how to live a life that does not just tolerate contradiction, but is nourished by it. We must now learn the art of being whole. Not perfect, we have traveled a long and winding road on this journey into the soul. We began with the familiar, conscious ego, descended into the personal darkness of the shadow, and then deeper still into the ancient, shared bedrock of the collective unconscious. We have met the archetypes that shape our lives, the outer mask of the persona and the inner soul image of the anima and animus. We have followed the great quest of individuation, learning the language of the soul through dreams and synchronicities. And we have bowed before the central, ordering mystery of the self. We have applied this profound lens to our relationships, to our suffering, and to the very sickness of our modern world, finally understanding the need to create a personal myth to light our way. Now, we arrive at the final destination, the synthesis of all these truths, the practical art of living a life that is not fractured by conflict, but made whole by the conscious embrace of paradox. Life itself is a paradox. We are born from darkness into light, only to return to darkness. We are finite beings who can conceive of infinity. We are animals driven by primal instinct, and we are spirits who yearn for transcendence. We are capable of breathtaking love and terrifying cruelty. For our entire lives, we are stretched upon the rack of these opposing forces. The fundamental teaching of Jung's psychology is that the goal is not to escape this tension. It is not to choose one side and defeat the other. The goal is to become a vessel strong enough to contain it all. The art of a conscious life is the art of living the paradox. We have encountered this truth at every step of our journey. We learned that we must build a strong and capable ego. Yet the ultimate task of that strong ego is to paradoxically surrender its own control and serve the wisdom of the self. We discovered that our most shameful and rejected shadow contains our most precious, unlived gold. That our greatest strength is hidden in what we perceive as our weakness. We saw that our relationships cause us our deepest pain precisely because they offer us our most potent opportunity for growth. That the person who mirrors our darkness is our greatest teacher. We understood that our neurotic suffering is not a meaningless affliction, but a sacred call from the soul to become more conscious. In every instance, the path to healing and wholeness lay not in eliminating one side of the equation, but in holding the tension between the two until a new, higher synthesis could emerge. This act of holding the tension is not a passive state. It is an act of immense psychological and spiritual courage. It is the willingness to stand in the fire of your own inner conflict without running away. It is the ability to feel both profound love and intense anger for the same person, sometimes in the same moment. It is the capacity to hold a firm conviction while simultaneously entertaining the possibility that you might be wrong. It is the strength to be both a disciplined, responsible adult and a playful, spontaneous child. It is the rejection of the ego's simplistic, black and white, either or thinking, and the embrace of the soul's complex, unifying, both and reality. To live this way is to move through the world with a new kind of integrity, one based not on a rigid set of rules, but on a dynamic, moment-to-moment balancing of the opposites within. This practice is not a destination at which you one day arrive. Wholeness is not a static state of perfection. You will not reach a point where you are free from conflict or contradiction. Life will continuously present you with new challenges that throw you off balance. The art of living with paradox is a continuous, dynamic practice. Like learning to surf. A master surfer does not command the ocean. They have simply learned, through countless hours of practice, how to feel the shifting energy of the waves and to make the subtle adjustments necessary to ride them with grace and skill. They still fall, but they know how to get back on the board. In the same way, an individuating person is not someone who has solved all their problems, but someone who has developed a conscious and creative relationship with them. They have learned how to use the energy of life's inevitable conflicts for the purpose of their own continued growth. The most perfect and complete symbol for this way of being is the ancient Taoist symbol of the Taijitu, more commonly known as the yin-yang. Within its simple circle, the entire philosophy we have been exploring is contained. The circle itself represents the self, the totality, the wholeness of the psyche. The interlocking black and white shapes represent the fundamental pairs of opposites, the cosmic dance of yin and yang, darkness and light, feminine and masculine, unconscious and conscious. The boundary between them is not a straight, rigid line, but a sinuous, flowing curve, showing that they are in a constant, dynamic interplay, each one flowing into and becoming the other. And most crucially, within the heart of the white shape, there is a dot of black. And within the heart of the black shape, there is a dot of white. This is the profound secret. Within the light of our conscious ego, there is always a seed of the shadow. Within the darkness of our unconscious, there is always a seed of a new light. Nothing is pure. Everything contains the seed of its own opposite. To live with paradox is to hold this entire symbol within your consciousness, to honor the dance, to respect the interplay, and to know that the seed of healing is always found in the heart of the pain. What is the ultimate reward for this difficult and courageous art? It is not a life free from suffering. It is not a state of perpetual, unassailable happiness. The reward is something far more precious. It is a life of authenticity. It is the deep, quiet peace that comes from no longer having to pretend to be something you are not. It is the freedom from the exhausting, soul-crushing burden of trying to be perfect. It is the sense of living a life that is truly your own. A life guided by the inner authority of the self rather than the outer clamor of the collective. It is a life rich with meaning, because even the suffering has a purpose. It is the simple, profound, and unshakable joy of being whole. You have finally come home to yourself. And in doing so, you have found your rightful place in the mystery of the cosmos. Our journey together is now coming to a close. We have traveled from the familiar, sunlit island of the conscious ego and braved the descent into the depths. We have faced the disowned mystery of the shadow. We have danced with the inner soul images of the anima and animus. And we have stood in awe before the vast, shared ocean of the collective unconscious. We have followed the path of individuation, learning to hear the whispers of the self in our dreams and in the meaningful patterns of our lives. We have seen how our relationships act as a sacred mirror, and how our deepest suffering is often a call home to a more authentic life. We have diagnosed the sickness of our time, and discovered that the antidote lies in the courage to find and live our own personal myth. We have learned, step by step, the demanding but deeply rewarding art of being whole. If there is one single truth to take with you from this entire exploration, let it be this. The goal of a human life is not to achieve perfection, but to achieve wholeness. Wholeness is not a state of flawless bliss. It is the courageous act of embracing all of who you are. It is the integration of your light and your darkness, your strength and your weakness, your joy and your sorrow. True peace is not found by eliminating conflict, but by developing the capacity to hold the tension of the opposites within yourself. The paradox is not a problem to be solved. It is the very nature of reality to be lived. Your life is not a problem to be fixed. It is a mystery to be experienced. And so, we leave you here, at the doorstep of your own unique journey. The map has been provided, but you are the explorer who must walk the path. Look at the contradictions of your own life, the inner conflicts that torment you, not as flaws, but as the holy starting point of your own great work. Listen to the messages in your dreams. Pay attention to the winks from the universe. Have the courage to be who you truly are, not who you think you should be. Trust that within you, beneath all the noise of the world and the fears of your ego, there is a wise, ancient, and loving center. A self that knows the way. The journey home to that center is the greatest adventure you will ever take.